very excited about this next panel because I'm going to be moderating it. And part of the reason I chose to do that is because the people on this panel, and we have two panelists who are zooming in virtually, are really doing some amazing work on men, women, and the birth dearth, that thing we keep talking about. So it is my great honor to introduce our speakers today. I'm going to start with Brad Wilcox, who is Melville Foundation, Jefferson Scholar Foundation, University Professor of Sociology, and the Director of the National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia. He is the Future of Freedom Fellow at the Institute for Family Studies and a non-resident Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He is the author of Get Married, Why Americans Should Defy the Elites, Forge Strong Families, and Save Civilization, which was published in 2024. And he studies marriage, fatherhood, and the impact of strong and stable families on men, women, and children. So Brad is going to be, as I said, coming to us virtually from Charlottesville. Brad, I'm so happy you're here, sort of. I mean, you know what I mean. Okay, next we have Louise Perry, who is a dear friend, and I know many people in here already know her name because she hosts the very popular podcast Maiden Mother Matriarch. It's a podcast about sexual politics, which is available on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and all other podcast platforms. And her best-selling debut book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, A New Guide to Sex in the 21st Century, is published by Polity. Louise, thank you for being here as well. Okay, next we have Erica Bacchiacchi. Erica Bacchiacchi is a legal scholar who works at the intersection of constitutional law, political theory, women's history, and Catholic social teaching. She is an EPPC fellow, the editor-in-chief of Fairer Disputations, and several of us authors at Fairer Disputations are here, so you'll have great respect for Erica. And a senior fellow at the Abigail Adams Institute, where she founded the Wollstonecraft Project. Her book, The Rights of Women, Reclaiming a Lost Vision, was a finalist for the Intercollegiate Studies Institute's 2022 Conservative Book of the Year Award. Her essays have been featured in major publications, and she serves on several advisory boards, including the Moral Ecology Trust at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture at UVA, and the Center for Law and the Human Person at CUA. And Erica, again, like so many of the guests tonight, is robustly invested in the cause because she has 7 children herself. So, yes. Next, we have Catherine Pocolick. Catherine Ruth Pocolick is an assistant professor of economics at the Bush School of Business and Economics at the Catholic University of America. Formerly, she was assistant professor and chair of the economics department at Ave Maria University, and her primary areas of research include economics of education and religion, family studies, and demography, as well as Catholic social thought and political economy. Dr. Pocolick is the 2015 recipient of the Acton Institute's Novak Award, a prize given for significant contributions to the study of the relationship between religion and economic liberty. And she is the author of the, again, extremely popular, went totally viral in every mom's group, reading group across America, the book Hannah's Children, The Women Quietly Defying the Birth Dearth. Finally, we have Imre Bedo, who, you'll have to excuse me, I have to flip through the program here. Imre Bedo is the founder of, excuse my pronunciation here, but I'm going to do my best, Férfiak Klubja, Men for All, a social organization with over 360,000 followers and regular media presence. He is a man, a husband, a father, and an intellectual driven by social responsibility. Born in Transylvania, he started his career as an economist in the banking sector, later becoming a top executive in industrial corporations before successfully running his own businesses. In 2013, he established Férfiak Klubja, a a male motivation-focused social initiative advocating for unity in strengthening moral foundations, reinforcing the male-female alliance and the family, and passing on timeless human values that build the society of the future. So, why don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you all for being here, and we're going to have Brad deliver his remarks first, and then Louise, you will come after Brad. Thank you all.
Thank you, Helen. And thank you to the Danube Institute for hosting this important conversation. I want to begin by sort of touching on the issue of men's marriageability. And I do so with reference to this particular conference and theme because there's a lot of work telling us that marriage is kind of an essential precondition in most societies for family formation and fertility more generally. My colleague Lyman Stone, for instance, has found that about 70% of the recent decline in fertility in the U.S. can be attributed to declines in the marriage rate. So I'm going to shift now to my presentation and working to get that going here on the screen for, can you all see that there in, yes, you can, great. So I'm thinking in particular about this question in terms of marriage and men's marriageability, kind of where have all the good men gone, is the question that I'm thinking about this morning for me and this afternoon for you there in Hungary. And I begin by just noting that when my book came out, when Get Married came out, I did not have a lot of pushback, surprisingly to me, with one major exception, and that is a number of authors and writers and critics made the argument that kind of you can't really encourage people to get married today because women in particular are having more and more difficulty finding a guy who would be marriageable from their perspective. So Anna Sussman, a leading kind of progressive journalist and writer, kind of had a piece in the New York Times that said this, among other things, quote, "Harping on people to marry from high up in the ivory tower fails to engage with the reality on the ground that heterosexual men from many walks of life confront the state of men today." Okay, so her basic argument is that you can't make the case, in a sense, for marriage and family today because women are confronting a world where too many men, from her perspective, are not interested in commitment, and too many men are not worthy of commitment when it comes to dating, mating, marriage, and family formation. Okay, so this is kind of a perspective that I hear from a lot of younger women today, and particularly the women on the left, like Anna Sussman. But this raises a question, I think, that, hasn't really been kind of clearly and cogently answered. And that is, with what kind of man, are women today flourishing, in a relationship and in a marriage and in a family? And so in thinking about that question, in other words, what kind of man are we kind of needing to sort of form to be a good boyfriend, to be a good husband, to be a good father in this contemporary context? And in thinking about this question in my book, and Get Married, I kind of find that three different kind of dimensions of sort of men's character and personality, if you will, are especially, I think, important even today in the 21st century. And so three things that kind of leapt out at me that are important for women today are men's success when it comes to providing, men's success when it comes to protecting, and men's success when it comes to paying attention. So three different kinds of P's for thinking about men's marriageability in the 21st century. So when it comes to providership, for instance, what we find in my book is that, for instance, married mothers are markedly happier when their husbands are working full-time as compared to being stay-at-home parents, and especially compared to their husbands working part-time or not being employed at all. And we also see kind of new research from Harvard sociologist Sasha Killawall telling us that when it comes to divorce, for instance, that when a wife loses her job, there's no effect on the stability of their marriage. When a husband loses his job, their risk of divorce increases by about 33%. So it just kind of tells us, kind of one more piece of evidence indicating that it's still the case, even in the 21st century, that women's both happiness and sort of the stability of their marriage are strongly linked to their husband's ability to be kind of a reliable breadwinner, reliable provider, even today in the 21st century. This is an American sample, American context. And then when it comes to protection, was surprised to kind of see when we looked at a wide range of different variables for women's marital happiness, that one of the top 4 predictors in our data set was women's kind of rating of their husband's success as protectors. So we find is that wives who reported that it's definitely true that their husbands are protective were 137% more likely to be very happy in their marriage compared to their peers who rated their husbands as less protective. And in my book, for instance, what I found was that in the case of, for instance, one young wife, she mentioned that kind of like a bookmark moment in her courtship with her husband was when they were on a subway in an American city late on a Friday night, and they were kind of going from one stop to the next, and the subway was emptying out, and from kind of one stop to the next, there was just one other man in the subway car. And as they were going from one stop to the next, this man kind of approached them, confronted them, demanded their money, and her then boyfriend stood up and put his hand out and started screaming at this guy and put his own body between her and their potential assailant. And thankfully, as this sort of thing was unfolding, they actually came to the next stop, which was crowded, and they were able to kind of just run out. But she reported that kind of her then boyfriend's willingness to kind of stand up and confront their assailant was kind of really a key moment in their courtship that kind of cemented her interest in him, her regard for him, and was kind of crucial to her then going on to marry this guy. So it's kind of one example of the way in which kind of protection is important for, in this case, I think both courtship but also marital quality. And then when it comes to paying attention, just see a lot of evidence that women are especially likely to be happy, even when their husbands are, in this case, for instance, rated as successful providers, when they're also kind of judged to be attentive emotionally, both to them and to any children that they have. And so what we find in my book, and Get Married, is that women who kind of give their husbands top marks when it comes to both providing and when it comes to emotional engagement are the happiest in their marriages, and then they're also more likely to be happy in their sexual relationships as well. So this kind of leads me to sort of conclude that men paying attention is also, important. And if you kind of take all these 3 things together, this kind of providership, this protection, and this kind of paying attention, it kind of suggests that a neo-traditional model of marriage is one that's most likely to make women both happy in their marriages and also to kind of increase the odds that they're stably married. But of course, the challenge that we confront today, not just in the US, but in many other societies across the globe, is that too many men are not measuring up when it comes to providing, when it comes to protecting, and when it comes to paying attention. And so in the US context, we see, for instance, that men are not doing as well as women in school and in college and vocational education. This kind of just gives you a sense of the pattern for college completion. Of course, I think everyone knows that this pattern is replicated in many societies across the globe now too as well. And then we're also seeing, particularly for men who don't have college degrees, a larger and larger share of young men and prime-age men either not being employed, as this figure here indicates, or not being employed full-time. So in the US today, about 1 in 5 prime-age men are not working full-time, and about 1 in 4 prime-age men who don't have a college degree are not working full-time. And that, of course, is a pretty powerful indicator of them not being kind of capable of being successful providers for a wife and for a family. And then when it comes to this issue of protection, we've seen in the US a kind of decline in men's physical strength, which would be kind of one way of thinking about men's capacity and sort of attractiveness as potential protectors. And then when it comes to sort of paying attention, what we're seeing is that young men's, I think, social skills and their capacity to be kind of, successful boyfriends and husbands is down. And one indicator of this is just the declining share of younger men who are dating on a regular basis, who are single, who are not married. So this is kind of also, I think, one way in which men are not kind of measuring up when it comes to a core feature of their potential attractiveness as a boyfriend and husband. So the bottom line here is that too many men are not marriageable, and the question is, what's driving this? Why are so many boys and so many men today floundering? I think there's an economic part of this puzzle in terms of the sort of failing fortunes of too many boys and men, and part of this puzzle kind of, I think, is related to the way in which so many of our businesses today, some of our most highly capitalized businesses in the U.S. and around the world, are really kind of building a business model that's built on kind of encouraging our boys and young men to kind of, chase one dopamine hit after another, and in ways that kind of degrade their motivation, that degrade their educational success, and then their capacity to flourish economically and socially. And I talk about this in terms of kind of the rise of electronic opiates. And so one example here would be obviously that Microsoft is, producing Xboxes, which would be kind of one example of the way in which, too many young men are kind of spending time devoted to gaming rather than time that could be devoted to hobbies or to education or, to cultivating social skills and engaging in activities like dating that would be more likely to foster the kinds of character, virtues, and skills that would prepare them for, a family future. And then when it comes to education, we can see is that too many schools, too many colleges, too many universities are not doing enough to kind of cultivate the imagination to attract kind of the hearts and minds of boys and young men to the educational undertaking. That when it comes to things as pedestrian as not offering boys enough opportunities to exercise or to have, sufficient time for, playing outside at recess. And this is one of the issues facing our boys in schools today. I think it's also the case, too, that the ethos that is cultivated tends to be more female-friendly rather than boy-friendly. And this is also a factor in kind of accounting for the growing gender gap we see unfolding in many schools. And then, too, just the curricula often tends to sort of favor subjects and readings that are more girl-friendly rather than boy-friendly. So education, then, is not doing enough to attract the attention and the allegiance of our boys, and in ways that kind of set them up for doing relatively worse, both in school and later on in college and in the vocational educational domain as well. And then a third point I'd make here in terms of trying to understand why this is happening, why this is unfolding, is that on certain key social and educational domains, what we're seeing is that boys and young men are especially affected by the breakdown of the family in recent decades. When it comes to a lot of our educational outcomes and social outcomes, in the US, for instance, we see that young men are more likely to be kind of registering the worst outcomes in things like incarceration and college graduation. And to be more concrete, what we see in my work with colleagues is that young men today in the United States who are coming from any kind of non-intact family are more likely to go to prison or jail than they are to graduate from college. And so again, I think one of the reasons why so many young men are floundering today in our society is that they are coming from families without their own married fathers in the home. And the final point that I would make, and a point too, I think that's really not appreciated by a lot of the more progressive proponents of this idea that men today are not sufficiently marriageable, is that we haven't given our boys, we haven't given our teenagers, we haven't given our young men, I think, a clear and compelling and constructive model of pro-social masculinity. And so because we have not done this, we have kind of left the field open to actors like Andrew Tate to kind of fill this vacuum. This, of course, is not a constructive model of masculinity for our young men. But again, it's, I think, one indication of the way in which our society today does not do a good job of kind of giving boys and giving young men a constructive model to aim for. So in terms of the road forward, I would suggest that we need to be thinking about ways to rein in the power of big tech in the lives of boys and teenagers especially, to make our schools more boy-friendly, to think about new ways to strengthen and stabilize marriage, the homes where our boys are being raised, and then to offer a clear and compelling model of masculinity that allows our boys and our teenagers, especially our young men, to think about how they can prepare to be better providers, better protectors, and men better capable of paying attention in ways that would increase the odds that they are, marriageable men in the 21st century. So thank you for having me virtually today.
Thank you so much, Brad. We'll return at the end after everyone has finished giving their remarks for the Q&A. So if you could stick around for that, that would be awesome. Louise, let's move on to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm just waiting to come up on screen. There we go. Hello. It's so lovely to be joining you all. Thank you, Brad, for your remarks. Thank you, everyone there in Budapest. Thank you particularly to Helen, who is organising this conference and hosting this panel while heavily pregnant. And I hear in your voice the breathlessness that I so vividly remember. So I'm so impressed with you for being on your feet despite what your body is undergoing. So I want to zoom out on this birth rates question, which I have been fascinated with for some time now. I've been working on a book on this issue for a while now, although I've also been walking the walk on birth rates, which has got in the way of my talking about the question. But I was initially attracted to this as a sociological puzzle in a way that many people are attracted to it. It's a fascinating sociological puzzle. Why is it that so many countries across the world, it's not just the West, it's not just Northeast Asia, it's actually almost everywhere in the world now except for sub-Saharan Africa, has seen a rapid drop in fertility in recent years, a drop that just seems to be continuing. And very many countries are below the replacement rate. Many countries are starting to think very seriously about what policy solutions might be available to arrest this decline. Hungary is, of course, a famous example of this. The sociological puzzle, I think, has a tendency to attract just so stories which scratch certain ideological itches. I know that I'm guilty of this. I initially came to this topic thinking, oh, I'm sure what's going on here is it's to do with the failures of the sexual revolution, it's to do with the contraceptive pill, it's to do with all my favourite hobby horses. I can easily wrap this up in a bow and say, I'm right, this is why this political problem is happening, right? However, having looked into it in greater detail, I have reached a more dismaying conclusion about what is actually causing the birth rate decline. I think of it sort of like that old Buddhist story about the wise men who are feeling for the elephant in the dark, and one of them grabs the trunk and says, oh, it's a snake, and one of them grabs the leg and says, oh, it's a tree. And actually the thing that they can't see because it's too large is that what they're feeling is the same thing, which is an elephant. So I think that when we see things like urbanization causing drops in fertility, when we see female labour force participation and female education correlating with drops in fertility, when we see young people flocking to electronic opiates, as Brad called it, which I think is a great expression, that's correlating with drops in fertility. I think that the actual central thing that is happening, and the factor that best explains all of these disparate phenomena, is affluence. There seems to be a phenomenon where when countries cross a certain threshold in terms of GDP per capita, it seems to be about $10,000 US. So that's the affluence of a country like the Philippines, roughly, or Nepal. The fertility declines to the point where it falls below replacement level. And there are all sorts of countries in the world that are now below replacement level, which would surprise a lot of people who haven't looked into this in detail. This isn't just an issue confined to the West or confined to very rich countries like Japan. And I think what's going on is that affluence, through some mechanism, which I can't claim to fully understand, makes people disinclined to reproduce. And what that means, as this phenomenon continues, as I think it is set to, at least for some time longer, is that we're going through what I think of as a sort of evolutionary bottleneck. An evolutionary bottleneck, not just in terms of the individuals who are being selected for in terms of certain traits, certain traits which make us more liable to reproduce in our current environmental conditions are heritable traits. We should expect them to become more common in future populations as a consequence of this bottleneck. But the selection is also happening at the cultural level and at the societal level. Some cultures, some societies seem capable of withstanding this in a way that others can't. And my hypothesis is that this process, this bottleneck, is going to be incredibly important in terms of defining the future of humanity. That actually this one issue, the fact that people seem disinclined to reproduce when they're affluent, is going to define the politics of this century and is going to have very, very consequential outcomes, not least for men and women, for the future of democracy even, the future of welfare states, the geopolitics more broadly. It is becoming a question that commentators engage with more often, that politicians engage with more often, although I think that Hungary is still an outlier in terms of taking it very seriously. My own country, Britain, doesn't take it seriously at all. I think that we can make some educated guesses about what consequences we are likely to see as time goes on, but they are just guesses. So at the individual level, for instance, one of the things that seems to make people more resilient to fertility shredding is religiosity. So not just having some kind of religious faith, people with some kind of religious faith are having more children than people who don't, but also denomination. Traditional Catholics, for instance, have more children than non-traditional Catholics. Catholics have more children than Anglicans. You can see in quite fine-grained detail the fact that when people are religious and take their religion more seriously, attend church more often, etc., they have more children. I think it seems fairly obvious to me that means that over time our societies are going to become more religious. So unless some other factor intervenes, that seems like a very likely conclusion to me. Another factor that I think we should expect to see more of is social conservatism. More socially conservative groups, again, are having more children. In America, there is now a widening voting gap where Republicans have more children than Democrats do, which was not true a generation ago, but is true now. We should expect that to have political consequences as time goes by. This is one of the reasons why, it's slightly eccentric of me maybe, I'm not that worried about wokeness, so-called, about a kind of radical progressivism, the type of progressivism that wants to tear down all traditions, that doesn't believe in biological sex. We all know what I'm talking about. It doesn't actually worry me that much in the medium term, even though it is a destabilizing political force, because of all of the groups, politically defined, radical progressives are having the least children by some margin, which seems just a mathematical fact to me, that means that ideology is going to wane over time unless it's able to continue converting people from other groups, which I suspect it will not be able to do as it becomes less powerful demographically. So these are the sort of speculations that we can make about how, what kind of individual traits are going to become more common, not just within our own societies, but across the world, everywhere that we're experiencing this fertility crash. In terms of nation states, and that the preeminent example of this having very serious geopolitical consequences is South Korea, which boasts the lowest total fertility rate in the world at 0.7. So that means, if I'm getting my maths correctly, that by 2100, there will be somewhere between 93 and 98% fewer children being born in South Korea than are being born today. So you extrapolate that out, that is catastrophic for South Korean fertility levels. And given that North Korea, its hostile neighbour, has an above replacement fertility rate just about, there are fairly obvious conclusions to be drawn about what we should expect to see in South Korea's future. And indeed, South Korea's leaders are very worried about this. These are the sort of factors that we are going to see. These are the sort of differential fertility phenomena that we are going to see play out across the world and within countries. One of the very interesting outliers in this regard is Israel, which is one of the very few, was really the only rich country which has above replacement fertility. And the reason that Israel has above replacement fertility, it seems to me, is because it has a very religious minority, which is becoming less of a minority as time goes by for precisely the reasons I've already outlined. So Israel is an interesting example here of a country that has managed to be both high-tech and also very religious, and therefore to have produced these high fertility rates, which, again, I'll return to this on the tech question because I think Israel provides an interesting example here. In terms of the political consequences over this century in particular, the political scientist Samo Berger has recently observed, quote, that the most notable political science results of the 21st century is that democracy cannot work with low fertility rates. All converge on prioritising retirees over workers and immigrants over citizens, escalating social transfers beyond sustainability. This is exactly what we are seeing across. I believe that we're in the early stages in particularly generous welfare states, like European nations, for instance. We are starting to see a political collapse resulting from low fertility, where there just are not enough young people and not enough working age people to honour pension commitments and healthcare commitments to older generations. And there's really only one way that this ends, which is with the collapse of those systems, and indeed the collapse of all sorts of political structures that we've grown used to. So Berger argues that the fertility crisis represents a challenge to liberal democracy akin to the challenge of managing the economy and international relations posed to Soviet communism. That this is a death knell potentially for this style of governance, and we should therefore expect to see more autocratic regimes as time goes by. This could go in two directions. So one is that low fertility countries learn how to be high fertility again. That what Hungary is experimenting with, for instance, with providing cash transfers to parents and various marriage incentives and all the policies that I think everyone in the audience will be familiar with, that these end up being successful and it is possible to return to a high fertility status quo without otherwise experiencing particular destabilization. That could happen. Another possibility is that low fertility countries learn how to cope with being low fertility, at least in the short term, through automation, through abandoning democracy, to put it bluntly. What I think, though, is really what I find particularly interesting about this topic, though, is this question of affluence that I raised at the very beginning. So the fact that affluence is the predictor of whether or not a country falls below replacement and therefore ends up risking political destabilization, geopolitical destabilization, all of these very fearsome outcomes from government's perspective. If some people, some conservatives, would say that maybe this isn't so very bad, that maybe actually, if affluence is so fatal to liberal democracies, if affluence induces people to be incapable of performing the most basic functions of living, which is reproducing, right? If societies can't perform the coordination task, which Brad so beautifully described, of matchmaking for young people and encouraging them to have children, then maybe there's something inherently wrong with affluence, and maybe it deserves to die, and maybe we should go back to living a more simple life. You hear this similar argument from some environmentalists, though from a different political perspective. Maybe it's for the best that people go back to living simpler lives and so on. I don't share that view. I still take roughly the techno-optimist view, which is that actually maybe there are some aspects of modernity that we would be better off without, but actually there is so much that we would miss. I mean, I would have died 6 months ago without modern obstetric care, giving birth to my second son. I think everyone in this room, if pressed, would recognise that actually affluence and modernity are phenomena that we desperately want to retain if we can, and that the fertility crisis represents an existential threat to them, I argue, which is genuinely troubling. The most worrisome outcome here is that affluence actually proves to not be self-sustaining, that this is actually I described it in a recent essay for First Things as a self-destruct button within societies. That's possible. What I think, though, is probably more likely is that actually, one way or another, we go through this bottleneck, we go through this transition, and societies and individuals who are capable of withstanding this, whether that be through religiosity, through social conservatism, whatever factor it is that I've discussed this briefly today, if those people and those societies are capable of withstanding that, then they will come to form the societies of the future. And in particular, if any societies can find a way of being simultaneously affluent and fertile, then they will have the world before them. And we don't really know what those societies are going to look like, but it seems obvious to me that these are the groups that are going to survive the 21st century and are going to form the future. And for better or worse, they are probably going to be quite different from us. So, yes, a zoomed out perspective on this birth rates question, but I hope not a pessimistic one. I'm not actually a pessimist about this question. I think that humanity will flourish one way or another, despite all, because of this historical shift that we're going through.
Thank you so much, Louise. I, too, very much hope that we can grow where we're planted here. And I'd like to pass it over to Erica now.
Thank you, Helen. Good to see my friends, Brad and Louise, on the screen. Wonderful to be with you all. It's my first time here. It's really quite beautiful. So obviously, gender polarization is a significant factor in declining marriage and fertility rates. And often we analyze how this polarization is manifesting itself politically, how young men are becoming more conservative while young women are becoming more progressive, how young men are becoming more tradition-minded while young women are becoming more career-focused, how young men are returning to religion while young women are certainly not, how young men still want to get married while young women not so much. And so from a conservative perspective, for all of us here, it's easy to side with the men, but Helen's asked me to speak about women, and specifically how we can win back young women from the clutches of liberalism and progressivism, which, being the cause of their problems, certainly is not going to be the cure. So I want to try to help us think about our time from their perspective, from the perspective of the kind of Gen Z woman. And it just so happens that in addition to the work I do in intellectual history, particularly concerning women, I am also the mother of 3 devout Gen Z women, all of whom have devout Gen Z boyfriends, and all of whom are really thriving in their lives. But of course, they have many, many peers of both sexes who are not. So I don't think we can make much headway in attracting women from progressivism, which I think we must, without seeking to understand their perspective and all that ails them, even if they aren't quite aware of it. So this is my view of kind of the causes of young women's current state and some solutions. So to my mind, we are living in the fallout of the modernist heresy, to put it in Catholic terms. To put it in terms of the history of political thought, we are living in what societies would look like when we have fully imbibed the myths of radical autonomy, materialism, and scientism, sure now of the truths and practice of Christianity that for a long time counteracted these kind of heady, abstract myths. And so what we see before us, it seems to me, is post-Christian degeneration of the sexes, with a flat, Hobbesian account of human nature that calls these degenerations natural. And so from the left, we hear that masculinity is everywhere and always tyrannical and dominating. And from the right, we hear that femininity is always and everywhere overly emotional, sensual, and manipulative. And friends, I do believe this is what degenerate masculinity and femininity look like. But these extreme emotional tendencies on the part of some progressive women on social media, political rallies, or even in our universities speak, it seems to me, far more of the want of authentic liberal education and the moral formation that has always been needed to order the human soul. Likewise, men's own vicious tendencies have been exacerbated by the loss of character formation, once central to even primary education in the West. The blame then should be directed first and foremost, not maybe at each other, but toward a system of progressive education that simply trains children to compete in the global marketplace as consumers, no less than knowledge and service workers. What we see before us then is the seismic impact of the loss of the morally formative, integrative enterprise that was liberal education, the kind of education that cultivates the intellectual and moral virtues that both women and men need to flourish as human beings. So feminine degeneracy has always been a major concern of female writers. And if I were a literary scholar, I'd look to Jane Austen or maybe George Eliot. If I were a church historian, I'd talk about the writings of the female saints. But since I'm a legal scholar, I study those who make legal claims on behalf of women. And as it turns out, the very earliest women's movement in my country, and in England too, wished for women to be thoroughly educated to ensure their cultivation of these virtues and spare them from this degeneracy. So I want to take a minute or two just to draw upon the insights of some of the leaders of the early American women's movement in this regard. Indeed, these early advocates for women understood their rights and responsibilities as deeply integrated with one another. So in an 1849 speech delivered at the very first National Convention of Women's Rights in the United States, the beloved leader of the early movement, Lucretia Mott, wrote proudly of, quote, all the difference that our great and beneficent Creator has made in relation of man and woman. She says of sexual difference, we are satisfied with nature. But she argues that women, like men, have a duty to develop their God-given powers and human capacities for the good. She was worried, as so many female writers before and after her, that women's want of a thorough education was leading to some to, quote, degenerate into a kind of effeminacy, a sentimentality in which she is satisfied to be the mere plaything or toy of society, content with her outward adornings and other superficialities. To become a true woman, Mott argues, she must, quote, understand her duties, physical, intellectual, and moral, and cultivate her powers as a moral and responsible being. Likewise, the conventions, this National Convention's president, Paulina Davis, offered a speech on the education of females in which she decried the widespread valorization of a certain kind of female weakness that masquerades as woman's nature per se. Cultivated, Davis argues, for the delights of her affectional nature, her heart is disproportionately developed, and she is made a creature of pure feeling and passionate impulse. Intellectual culture of any kind which might abate or stead or balance feeling is held unwomanly in her time, and the female sex is enslaved by the disproportionate activity of its own distinguishing traits. Notice here, enslaved not by men, but by woman's lack of integral development of herself as a fully human woman and mature woman. The overstrength of her heart, Davis concludes, is exaggerated by the weakness of her head. Listen now to Catholic philosopher Edith Stein, 75 years later. The one-sidedness to which by nature the woman inclines is particularly dangerous. Unilateral emotional development. She continues, where discipline of mind and will are lacking, emotional life becomes a compulsion without secure direction, which I think we're seeing some of these days. Indeed, this unilateral emotional development is the chief target of English philosopher Mary Wollstonecraft's 1792 treatise on the vindication of the rights of woman as well. Throughout this early treatise on women's rights and the correlative duties and virtues, Wollstonecraft points to the many risks to women who forego their own moral and intellectual development to be kind of merely pleasing to men. Importantly, Wollstonecraft regards, quote, the care of children in their infancy to be one of the grand duties annexed to the female character by nature, end quote. Grand duties. But she worries that the natural obligations of mothers to care for their young children won't overpower corrupt social norms that tempt women to more superficial pleasures. It's only by placing oneself in right relationship with God and developing the rational and moral faculties, Wollstonecraft thinks, will women see how important their work is as daughters, sisters, wives, and mothers, as well as citizens. To carry out the work of cultivating virtue in children, which many of us here know is very, very difficult and important work, a woman must be strong and faithful, focused on preparing her children and herself for eternity. So Mott, Davis, Stein, and before them, Wollstonecraft, all want by education, and as Stein added, objective work, to protect women from the characteristic vices to which they are tempted, in order to call them to the full integration of themselves as human persons, as mature, fully cultivated women who freely dedicate their lives to the good of others. Imagine a women's movement so dedicated, much different from the feminist movement today. But today we have instead a generation of women who have grown up, as we heard Brad talking about earlier, with violent pornography on devices in their pockets and an autonomy-oriented feminism that has defended porn rather than fighting it. I do not think we can overstate just how frightening porn itself and the men who have been formed by porn are to young women. Or frankly, how frightening is the rhetoric of someone like Tate, right, an extremely online right-wing male provocateur who talk as though they believe kind of the proper relation between the sexes is something like domination and subservience or submission instead of reciprocity, collaboration, and care. It seems frightening enough for some girls and young women to attempt to flee womanhood altogether through transing their bodies, or others so broken from the sexualization and objectification they see, they figure they'll just monetize it on OnlyFans instead. But it's not only porn, I think, that is behind a real fear on the woman's side, though I do think that is a primary cause. It's also the massive destabilizing technological revolution we're living through, with social media use causing women high levels of anxiety. But add to all the foregoing the real fear which many ordinary women have of pregnancy and childbearing, with 62% of American women reporting an extreme fear in a recent study. So without robust guidance, and I think a lot of grace from true religion, and without the soul-ordering enterprise of liberal education, really the lost jewel of the West that some of us are reclaiming in our own neighborhoods, A woman with high levels of anxiety, especially about pregnancy, and often only porn-watching partners to choose from, makes, it seems to me, an entirely reasonable decision not to marry or have children. Rather, the ascendant norms of modern liberalism, workism, consumerism, and the pursuit of whatever makes you happy seem like the obvious way to go. And so, yes, women are foregoing men, sex, and children for work, wages, and travel instead. And from an individual perspective, the trade-off seems entirely rational, even to their fathers. From a demographic perspective, it is completely suicidal. So then how do we get modern women to have babies? I've had 7. We have another woman who's had many here too. This is our question, is it not? Well, first, I'm just going to say that if men are actually leaders of families and civilizations, which I, as a conservative woman who also calls myself a kind of feminist too, I think men actually have the responsibility to be these leaders, then men are going to have to lead here as well. Because women will continue, I think, to act kind of in their best interest, and I think they're right in some way, to decline being a mother with all the real vulnerability and dependency it entails with a man they cannot trust. Now, it's a real shame that many women today still risk sex with men who have not yet earned their trust. And so we're all, I think, probably on this panel, maybe in this room, working on rolling back the cultural poison that gave them that insane idea. And of course, the technology that made it all possible. But if we can inspire women, and I think Louise herself is doing a lot of this, to stop giving away their bodies to unworthy men, men have got to become worthy to receiving them again. As mothers, women can do their part with our boys, teaching them how to govern their appetites and avoid the poison that is porn. And believe me, that's exactly the charge I have with my own teenage sons who are growing into real gentlemen. But as a cultural matter, it is good men who must step up and help boys put down the porn and help them become real men. And for this reason, we all ought to be hopeful, and I think really prayerful, about, number one, young men returning to church in higher numbers than we've seen before, and number two, the men at this conference and out there in the world who are taking up the formation of men really seriously, knowing that many of us women are doing the very same with the other sex. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Catherine, I'll have you come and deliver your remarks. And Valera, I believe she has a presentation as well.
Will it work?
No, it's not working.
Doesn't work.
Go ahead and start.
Okay. Okay. That's great. There are nice pictures to go with this, but we can use our imaginations. That's just as well. And after Erica's really inspiring remarks, I thought we should get right to the story about how we can encourage young men. So this might be an intermission in between, but that's okay. I'm going to just ask you to close your eyes for a minute and imagine a Model T. There was a photo of a Model T. The Ford Motor Company introduced the Model T in 1908. And Henry Ford said, I will build a motor car I will eventually get around to talking about men and women, by the way. I will build a motor car for the great multitude. It will be large enough for the family, but small enough for the individual to run and care for it. It will be constructed of the best materials by the best men to be hired, after the simplest designs that modern engineering can devise. But it will be so low in price that no man making a good salary will be unable to own one and enjoy with his family the blessing of hours of pleasure in God's great open spaces. So the cars had city uses, they had farm uses, and everything in between. Henry Ford's automobile was a great success. More than 15 million Model Ts were sold between 2008 and 1927 when it was finally replaced by the Model A. And you know how this goes. But there was a casualty, and actually there are many statues of this casualty around cities like this one. The horse was the casualty of the Model T. Model Ts eroded demand for the animals all over the country. Cars offered several advantages over horses. And in case you haven't thought recently about what kind of advantages cars offered over horses, I will remind you. So cars were much faster than horses, and they didn't tire out. The Ford Model T topped out at about 45 miles per hour, while a horse, it turns out, gallops at half that speed for only a short moment or two. So a 50-mile trip that might have taken a horse-drawn carriage about 10 or 12 hours could be done in 1 or 2 hours by car. Reliability and weather independence, and for the sake of time, I won't describe all the ways that horses were vulnerable to illness, injury, exhaustion, heat stroke, mud and snow and heat were all problems for horses, and cars could shoulder it all. Capacity and versatility, so cars could carry more cargo and passengers efficiently, and there's no need to stable a car. You just parked it, saving time. And finally, not finally, actually, let's see, cost and maintenance. I'll skip over this one. I was going to go right to sanitation and urban living. So a city like Budapest or New York City, London, Chicago, around the year 1900 were clogged with filth and flies and disease and typhoid because of the massive amounts of waste that horses produced. So 15 to 35 pounds of manure and a gallon of urine every day. Okay, so if you can do the math on this one, multiply that by 120,000 horses in New York City alone in 1907, and this meant over 2 million pounds of manure every day. So I had a picture of that for you. That would have been your best memory of this conference. In any case, so obviously cars really improved on this. And then finally, land use. Cars freed up a lot of land, so horses required vast amounts of pasture, not only for grazing, but also just to produce the feed for all of those horses. And so, does anybody want to guess in which year in the United States the population of horses peaked? Graph for you there, too. The year that horses peaked was 1910. So it just took 2 years after the Model T was introduced for Americans to begin substituting away from horses at scale. By 1912, cars outnumbered horses in New York City, 1912. And by 1917, there were no more horses in New York City. And, likewise, the rest of the cities looked the same. So American culture, I'm going to switch to culture, was revolutionized by the car, and you know this. But the culture evolved to embody a new form of needs meeting. And this is an example of what the great Polish anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski called the functional theory. He wrote, "It is clear, I think, that any theory of culture has to start from the organic needs of man. It succeeds in relating the more complex, if it succeeds in relating the more complex, indirect, but fully imperative needs of the type which we call spiritual, economic, or social, it will supply us with a set of general laws as we need in sound scientific theory." So the horse culture gave way to the car culture broadly and definitively, right? There is no going back without eliminating the car, or its effects on urban and rural living. Also on time and space perception, if you want to know what destroyed small communities, it was the automobile. Work and social roles, class and status, leisure and entertainment, language and imagination. And the last one, it's really fun to watch in the Google Ngrams the way references to horses like "hold your horses," which in English means something else, has nothing to do with horses, to things like step on the gas or in the driver's seat. This sort of language evolves even. So it's everything. People used to say, of course, that politics is downstream from culture, and now we hear more often from our young political theorists that culture is downstream from politics, but Malinowski would have rejected both of those formulations and said culture is downstream from function. He wrote, "It is clear that we have to approach the concept of function through the concepts of use or utility and relationship. In all activities, we find that the use of an object as part of a technically, legally, or richly determined behavior leads human beings to the satisfaction of some need." So horses gave way to cars because of a profound improvement of needs meeting, and the culture soon reflected the same. So today, horse ownership, like who still owns horses today, is limited to the few uses that horses have left, and to those who, wait for it, value horses intrinsically. and have the means to own them. So these are the horse enthusiasts. Because horses are sidelined in culture, those who pursue horses for personal reasons have to put up with a society that doesn't prioritize horses, isn't organized for horses, and finds little reason to make accommodations for a mere personal preference. Okay, so you know where I'm going. Okay. All right, so children are like horses. All right. So this is the point. Children have been replaced by other easier, cheaper, better ways to meet organic human needs. And so in many ways, what I'm about to say really builds on things that Louise brought to us, and hopefully we will see a way out of this. The first is the need for help and labor. And you probably can't imagine the number of ways in which children were helpful when we were very poor. So children were replaced, as it were, by machines, by economic growth more generally, so as Louise says, by affluence. Because when people were poor, children helped immensely the prosperity of a household, right? If you got married, a young couple got married, you'd think, boy, we should sure have a couple of 10-year-olds around here. But the only way to get a couple of 10-year-olds around here is to have a couple of babies first, and you're to wait 10 years. So you better get started, right? After economic growth, people were less desperate for help, and we still see that dynamic existing. Second is the need for old age support, right? So children were replaced, as it were, by socialized pension programs. In general, socialized pension programs, we can certainly say savings. All right, well, we'll have to go quickly through. All right, well, there's the manure in New York City. There were whole episodes of manure crises in cities. Here's the graph of the cars peaking. And so this is what took place. And where am I? There's the kids on the farm. All right, so kids are very helpful. And then old age support. Join the march to old age security. And by the way, there were many, there was a lot of propaganda from those years, like kids are not your support, like kids should not be your old age support, like give up on that, that's antithetical. And finally, need for sexual union. So a child-laden sexuality was replaced by child-free sexual unions, and we really need to appropriately go back. I think the pill does sort of, it's helpful to think about that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But really, the 1850s is when rubber was vulcanized in the first rubber condoms. 1920s was latex, and the 1920s was a huge explosion of condom use. And then finally, the pill. But before, sexual union required having children. So what I'm trying to help you see is sort of like the need for kids. Like, what are the reasons you need to have children? And if, even if you got rich, and even if you had old age support, you might still need children if you didn't want to live a celibate life. But nobody wants to live a celibate life. What about the need for reproduction itself? To have offspring, to be a parent. What we have to know there is whether people have an independent need of children apart from a biological need for sexual union. And we might want to answer in the negative just looking at the data. People have been having a lot of sex for 100 years, but not a lot of children. But more importantly, nature seems to have endowed us with a very powerful drive to mate as the vehicle by which the need for reproduction is satisfied. And this stands to reason, because if by nature we desired children per se and not through the sexual pair bonding, we would seek children apart from the unions which bear them, which is on evolutionary terms very bad for children. So it stands to nature. All right, so in sum, demand for children collapsed just as demand for horses collapsed. The child culture gave way to a sex culture broadly and definitively. There's no going back without undoing this sort of triplex of technological shocks, I don't think. So people who have children today, maybe some of you in this room, some of us, are like the child enthusiasts, people who want them in spite of their uselessness and heavy opportunity cost. And here is a little bonus for your price of admission, which is that demand for partnering in marriage collapsed for the same reason. Marriage is the social institution you need when children are needed. Children are the engine of marriage, just as the horse is to the carriage. Rates of partnering in marriage fall right along with the total fertility rate. If all this sounds rather abstract, consider that people aren't out there frantically searching for a mate so they can get started having children to live a good life. They are still frantically, however, searching for jobs, food, drinks, vacations, experiences, and so on to have a good life. So nobody at the start of life thinks that a child is needed to improve your life. A child is a liability, and it's not enough, I would like to say, as the ambassador said this morning, to make sure that you don't have a fiscal penalty. So that's good. We don't want fiscal penalties to having children. But children aren't anywhere a path to making your life better in these ways. Society needs children, but one household doesn't need children. And what I just stated is sort of in economic terms a big problem. So that lends to all sort of collective action problems. So I'd like to say that Malthus is in the room with us now. And I'd like to say that we're probably asking the wrong question about birth rates. And I think we've always been asking the wrong question, starting with Malthus, although it goes below. We just put a lot on Malthus, but it predated Malthus too. So Malthus and Paul Ehrlich assumed that people breed like animals, roughly like animals, even against their own instincts or their own interests. They assumed that family sizes were not the result of a rational cost-benefit decision-making, but a simple biological relationship of resources in and children out. They believed that births could be expected, that natality is an instinct, a default position for humanity, and thus lower birth rates would require external pressures, incentives, nudges, and downward policy pressures. Natality imposes social costs like pollution and requires some kind of solution. Take away resources and people will have fewer children. And this was literally the eugenics playbook. With the people we didn't think should have children, we took resources away from them. And we figured that would work. Oddly enough, it's possible today, even on the pronatalist side, to sort of unwittingly adopt the same faulty position, to assume that people naturally want to marry and have children, and that family sizes are not the result of a rational cost-benefit decision-making, but of a simple relationship, resources in and children out. We can come to believe, because we value children, that births can be expected, that natality is an instinct, the default position for humanity. Thus, low birth rates must result from malevolent external pressures like low wages or high housing costs, downward policy force, and that natality is a positive externality like education and calls for some kind of solution, and therefore prescriptives for nudging up the birth rate can often share a fatal flaw with the Malthusians of the past, which is, if you give people more resources, they will have more children. The trouble is that the facts of the declining birth rate doesn't make much sense if we begin with the idea that having children is the default position of the human race. And we've reviewed these facts already, so I'll move through this quickly. It happens everywhere in countries with higher women's education and lower, more resources and lower, more social benefits and lower. If natality is an instinct and birth rates result from external pressures, low birth rates result from external pressures, we should be able to put our finger more easily on the circumstances causing low birth rates. Yet a look at the global birth rate decline would suggest rather the opposite, that non-natality is the norm. Second, by and large, women and men have never been freer and richer to choose their family size. So to suppose that natality and not its lack is the default position is to suppose that the wealthiest and freest people in the world have been able to choose all wanted things except children. The position of default natalists is not just that some people are constrained at the margin, but that everyone everywhere is constrained from reaching their too desired number of children. It makes a lot more sense to say that not having kids is what all of these free and wealthy people want, especially in light of the fact that family sizes do today show considerable variation. It's possible to have more, but most people don't. Third, not really sure what happened there. There we go. Third, direct incentives don't work very well to boost fertility. South Korea estimates that it spent $286 billion. You know how difficult this is here. Not only birth rates going low and going lower, but projections of birth rates have been vastly too optimistic, in fact. One after another, the projections keep missing, underestimating the pace and duration of falls in birth rates. So if you're not persuaded of this, look at the 2024 data, and it's fairly discouraging. If people were interested in having children but merely constrained resource nudges would work, or they would work on some segments of the population, but they generally don't work. Finally, birth rates have been falling for more than 200 years, But the inflection point to below replacement fertility resulted from the atomic advance in contraceptive technology in 1960, not a political or economic treatment effect. In the 1960s, people were not especially poor, at least in my country, and not especially family unfriendly. In fact, a very family-friendly 1950s and 1960s ushered in the era of sub-replacement fertility, and I'm showing you that this massive swap to a smaller ideal family size occurred in the 1960s and was completed by the 1970s. In fact, below replacement birth rates have been the norm in the United States since the 1970s. This is not a new phenomenon. So I would argue that the default natalists seem to have it wrong. Wherever people could get their hands on the means to reduce births, they seem to do so. And adopting the notion that people fundamentally want to have children forces us into a nonsense position, that the freest, wealthiest, and most reproductively enabled people in history has not been able to act on their biological inclination to have children. If having kids is an instinct or a constant inclination of the human animal, we are surely the least functional species on the planet. No, it is vastly more sensible to conclude that having children is an act and a habit for individuals and for societies, a mode of human excellence governed by the classical account of human action, the rational part of the rational animal. People choose to do a thing because they want its object perceived to them as good, or because they need its object, necessitation that does or does not give rise to real wanting. The question we need to be asking is what makes people want to have children? If children are not necessitated anymore, to whom and why are they still wanted? So in the interest of time, and I'm concerned that we get to our final speaker, I will kind of quickly summarize what I have here. And I more or less wrote a book about why people still want to have children. And so I was really delighted to hear that the experience of the ambassador in my country reflects what I bring in this material. But in fact, 5% of Americans are still having families as large as their early American sisters. And that percentage has not declined since 1990. They are as if immune from this low birth rate crisis. So a good question is, who are they? Why do they do what they do? And do they have any relevance for declining birth rates? And I've argued in 96,000 words or so that they do have a lot of relevance. So another way to view them would be rather to view them like strange Arctic explorers. Do you feel like a strange Arctic explorer? I know sometimes. I know sometimes we do. And so my book, Hannah's Children, is a narrative account of the first qualitative study of women choosing larger families against this trend to sub-replacement fertility. So I am going to, in the interest of time, actually just fast forward over these things, and I will summarize for you what they told me. The women I met, let me see, I'll give you this final one. The women I met wanted children because they believed that children are blessings from God, expressions of divine goodness and the purpose of their marriages. They believe children are like health and wealth, that you can't have too much of any of those things. These women represent a fundamentally different worldview. They are different in kind from people with smaller and limited family sizes. They believe that the worthiness of having children proves itself over time in ways that evade human design and expectation. They were open to more children because they believed in a greater wisdom of which children and human generation were a part. These were the kind of reasons of the heart which overcame this enormous economic calculus, which is otherwise against having children. So you can read their stories, and I say that these are the child enthusiasts of our time. So my parting words for you, dispense with a horse. My parting words for you, I asked my students, what would I have to give you to make you want to buy a horse? And the answer, the room was in the room was a lot of blank stares and confusion. One woman said, "Why would I want a horse?" And a young man said flatly, "A horse is just a giant liability." And that is the status of children today. So I will leave you with three ideas. First, that people are rational choosers. We shouldn't romanticize interest in children in the past any more than we should romanticize interest in anything else. Measures of unconstrained preferences are not serious. Everyone wants to lose 5 pounds. Everyone wants to make more money. Fertility gaps indicate something, but probably not what we think they indicate. Among the women I interviewed with 8, 9, or 10 children, even they wanted one more child than they had. Yeah, I would like to have one more, but I am dried up. My children are still praying for it, however. This is the second thing. Revealed preference is the more important indicator of what people want and what they need, and how they assess the relative value of things. The utility of having children has collapsed. The opportunity costs have risen. Children bear an economic wound that cannot be undone unless we roll back the clock on economic growth, modes of production, savings, public pensions, and family planning. But that is all retrogressive, and it's supported nowhere that I'm aware of. The contraceptive revolution was the mother of technological shocks. Policy nudges can no more shift the birth rate substantially than they can take us back to the era of horse and buggies. And finally, fertile outliers show that this is no cause for despair. What currently and reliably overcomes this calculus is a personal conviction that children are desirable. As my friend Patrick Brown said this morning, fertile outliers explain why Israel's birth rate remains well above replacement, explains the difference in the state-level birth rates in the United States. People of all faiths, and none at all, who have children today are united by the view that having children is as worthy of pursuit as other noble pursuits like climbing high mountains, making great art, and falling in love. And personally fulfilling in a long-term, delayed gratification, experience good sort of way. The great news is that this is not as hard or as expensive as the failed policy approach. It happens every day. More than half of the women I interviewed did not want their final family size when they started out. Fertility desires are maximally changeable. Life experiences, new information, and religious conversions. This is not a program of do nothing. It's a program of witness to the reasons children are valuable. Public service campaigns, books, films, documentaries, research centers on the value of children, and being nicer to the quirky religious communities that see children as a blessing from God. The traditional Catholics and the Amish, the weirdest 10% of Mormons, the Lubavitchers, the Bruderhof. Talk to them, bring them into policy conversations, find out how they see the world, and share those stories. Let them run schools and pass on their values. Don't close them down during national emergencies. Don't force them to get medical treatments that violate their consciences. Don't spend their tax money on things they find evil. And don't mock them when their children get married very young. Mm-hmm. In short, don't try to make the people who really want children normal. Their weirdness is the national treasure that we need. Thank you.
Passing it over to our final panelist, Imre Bedo.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for all of your thoughts. If I can start with a small remark, because I was just thinking that our problem, this is a very important issue, that our cultural change was not an organic one. It was really an aggressive and artificially forced change. And that's why coming back it's not possible based on function. Because this is in fact a kind of cultural blackmail. Somebody blackmailed our culture, and now we have to bring her somehow back. But this blackmailing took 100 or 150 years, took a lot of money. It has a really big network. And now we have to do something against, because we can rebuild this culture artificially as well. So when I started my mission, Man for All, 12 years ago, I just knew that men are somehow in the center of this falling apart. And men are not in the center of this as a man, because they are not acting. They are put aside. And only the effects of these 100 years, only the consequences of these 100 years are affecting them and are affecting us. All that what we heard about from Brad Wilcox are the effects, are the consequences. And the men are not active. And I wanted to raise men to be active in changing this, because I think that we have to bring men back to the families. We have to bring men back to fight for women, to fight for families, to fight for life, to fight for love. Because otherwise, now it's nothing for men. Only the pacification is for men, that you should keep quiet and you should be aside, because they are afraid of fight. The other side, I mean. But everything is for women. All the campaigns, all the suggestions, all the articles, all the frightening ideas are for women. I have 2 daughters, and I'm just really curious how they can cope with it. I'm doing my best at home. But anyhow, the women are under so great pressure now. And if we don't bring men back into the families, women will also leave the families. Nowadays, in these years, the pressure on women causes that more and more girls are thinking on quitting families or leaving the families, or not. This is not important anymore. And this is because in the latest, let's say, 150 years, the families were kept by those women who just didn't quit, who just resisted. But they don't really want to resist anymore. They don't want to make this effort, this huge effort, and they want also to earn money and to consume. So we have a very little time to bring men back to the family, because those girls who are now 10-year-old, within 10 years they will be 20, and those who are 20 now, they will be 30. And I see this bad let's say, thing happening. The other problem is that we are living somehow a biblical time, which is not a good thing. The Bible said that belief is through hearing. And somebody had to formulate, somebody had to put in words those things which causes the belief, which build the belief. And the belief somehow became a culture after. And now this culture is destroyed. And we have to reformulate again. We have to put in words again the very smallest, very, very basic things. What is a man? What is a woman? Why is family good? Why is a kid good? Why is monogamy is good? What monogamy is doing? In the last, I think, 1,000 years, we didn't have to formulate these very, very basic things. And our problem is that now are 99% of the people needs this reformulation, because in the cultural and spiritual level, this background is destroyed. I personally, in my mission, started to rebuild the picture of man, the picture of a servant leader of family, servant leader of life, servant leader of life, servant leader of family. And if we rebuild this picture is this spiritual picture can make people able to follow this picture. And that's why, as St. Paul said in the Bible, that our fight is not against body and blood, but is going on in the spiritual structure, and the other side knows it. And that's why they are destroying everything which is related to man, and now everything is questioned. Man, woman, kids. So I don't want to repeat. But we have to reformulate again, but we have to go with these ideas to too many people. It's not enough to reach let's say 10%. We have to reach 99% if we can. If we reach only 10, 15, 20%, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of work, because we have to formulate it in a proper way. And, it's too small. Because most of the people's mind, most of the spiritual structures, if they destroy the spiritual structure, they destroy the ability, the capability of the people to follow them. And that's why we have to rebuild this. And if we are talking about men, we should formulate that in their own language, using their own ideas, their own ancient formulas. And we have to address to the man, because nowadays, if we are talking about family, if we are talking about kids, if we are talking about love, man thinks that this is for women. This is, of course, is not for us. For us, it's politics, money, working, I don't know, sports, and all this stuff. But family, love, and I don't know, kids, next generation is for women. So we have to address them on their own language. Okay, that man, we should do this and that. And this is a very, very interesting marketing thing, and how we should address the young, the boys, how we should address the mothers, and who are raising boys, and the fathers as well. So this is a work what has been done. We have to do it. And until now, in the last centuries, boys were raised for being the servant leader of the family. They were raised for that. This was in the center of their whole life as a boy, and they became a man by starting this work. Now boys are raised to work on their working places. Or the role models for boys are the working guys, the billionaires, the entrepreneurs. And even at home, if a father goes home, he will tell his boy that, okay, you should learn like this, you should work like that, you should bring home some money. And you know, they are not bringing home the money, they bring home some money. So this is really not a successful life for them, because they don't have the right path. And in one of my books, I write about the success of the society. And I bring a lot of examples that the success of the society is depending very much on what that society is doing with the power of man. It's very important what the society, how it organizes the power of man, what they are doing with it. And the Western society just channeled all the power of the man into the workplaces, but outside the family. And it's a very different idea to channel it to the workplaces through the family. That the family is first, and you know, are working and you get some money because of serving life. But the new program is that you are raising them for working places and for making some money. That's why they are so sick and they are so nervous and so on. If we think on demographic problems, I want to touch a few issues. I don't have time at all. For instance, regarding demography, the second and the third child is depending on the man, I say. The first child is you know, every woman, almost every woman, not now anymore, they want one child because the first child is their child, okay, and also the man child. But after the first child, it's very interesting what man will do. If they are not satisfied with the changes of being a family, if they are arguing for more sex, let's say, or if they are not coming home, they don't want to change their lifestyle. If a woman slightly thinks on divorce, if in a woman's mind slightly comes the fear of divorce, she doesn't want the second child, because she can run away with one, but with two it's more hard, and with three it's more hard. So the stability of the man after the first child is very, very crucial. And we have to prepare men before marriage, for family. That was our cultural heritage. that we prepared men for being the servant leader of the family. This is the most important thing, and we work for that purpose. We gather money for that. We become a better and better person for this purpose. But we are serving life, always. So it's very interesting that we really have to take care of this cultural shift. And I don't have much time. I could talk about maybe 2 or 3 other things. But if we want to make, I want to only one more, okay? We want to be brave. If we want to change this culturally. For instance, I want to put an example. We have to be brave to bring up very, very sensitive topics. For instance, my opinion is now I put here, maybe I just tested how horrible it is. I would I would bring back boys and men into the abortion decision. This is, a sensitive theme. They say that this is women's body and they have to decide because it's their body. I just teach my own daughters. That is your body until you give it to a man. After you gave it to a man, and if somebody happens, this is already the two of your bodies inside your body. So this is a very, very big responsibility. And it's not fair with women. I have 2 daughters. That, the sexual life responsibility is only on their shoulder. Because all the men can tell, okay, you will decide, decide on this matter. I was raised by that this is your responsibility. So the sexual life is a responsibility for a man as well, and for a woman as well. So if we could, let's say, put back men into this decision, maybe the sexuality would be more responsible, maybe the marriages would be more stable, and maybe we would have more kids. I just could raise only a few topics, and really I thank you that I could participate, and let's see, we have a few more minutes to discuss. Thank you very much.
Is this on? Okay, great. All right, so we started a little bit late, so we might go, like 5 minutes over, because we got a break after this anyway. But okay, thank you so much for your remarks. Sorry? Yes, Brad and Louise, are y'all still there? Okay, great, perfect. Okay, so what I really loved about everyone here, Catherine's was more specifically about economics and history and the birth dearth, but it seemed like everybody else pointed to the specific degeneracies of men and women, and the specific ways that in this sort of postmodern landscape, men degenerate and women degenerate. And so my question for everyone, and I'd love everyone to answer this, is what practical steps in the culture can be taken to improve relations between men and women by improving those specific degeneracies of men and of women? And I'll just sort of posit what I mean and what I envision, and I'd love to get your feedback on this. So my husband is an amazing guy. He was captain of the boxing team at Penn State, and he's just super tough and handsome and all the things, right? So anyway, but he really sees fight sports and physicality as a way of tempering, I think, maybe the specifically male biases by bringing the body into a discipline and training himself to reject passivity, reject that inner effeminacy, as Erica said. And so, I'd love to just pass that over to the panelists. What ways specifically do you think that men and women can temper their own versions of degeneracy in their daily practical life.
Well, did Louise want to talk? Yeah. We're giving the floor to Louise. Can you hear us?
I've been nominated.
We want to make sure we don't neglect you since you're flat.
Well, I certainly agree with Helen's husband about formalized pugilism, right? I'm sure is very good for young men and boys, and I certainly intend to introduce my own sons to this. I think that there is a lot to be said, and I think that this is very much the project of what Mary Harrington has partly tongue-in-cheek called reactionary feminism, of which I am an advocate, which is respecting the differences and the complementary nature of men and women and of masculinity and femininity, and encouraging the virtues that are specific to the sexes, but also the virtues that overlap, and being comfortable with those differences. I think that's the key way in which reactionary feminism diverges from current mainstream forms of feminism. And yes, in a way, actually, I see the challenge for girls as being greater than the challenge for boys. I can think of a million things that you could encourage young men to pursue that would hone their masculine virtues, not just sports, but also scouts and cadets, and there are all sorts of institutions. I think that actually girls, it's more of a challenge. How does one encourage one's daughters into doing tasks that hone her virtues without focusing exclusively on her appearance? It's quite difficult. How do we encourage young women to embrace traditional femininity without also, which I think is wonderful in many ways, and I think traditional feminine skills ought to be cultivated, but without encouraging her to neglect her intellectual skills, which has always historically been the risk, as I'm sure Erica can tell us, right? That women's intellectual skills being marginalized is always a risk when it comes to this complementary view of the sexes. Yes, I welcome responses from everyone else on this exact issue because I think it's quite vexed.
Well, just a very short one. I think we should do as much as we can in single-sex education.
Yeah.
Don't really see how we can grow up girls and boys to have distinct virtues and to correct their distinctive deficits if they don't spend a significant portion of their formative years being formed according to principles of gender-specific education. And those should be good ones, of course. They shouldn't be defective ones, but of course, Edith Stein mentioned, spend a lot of time thinking about that, but that's been mostly sidelined for over 100 years. We should bring it back.
I completely agree, and we have a lot of programs. For instance, one of them is the Granite Lion Award. This is a very famous award here in Hungary, given for man. This is a man award. As a father, as male teacher, as a master, as a businessman, and as a public person. But they have to be man. So everything has to be very, very clean in their life. This is very hard to find this kind of man, but we always find, especially on business side and on public person side, but we find that this is a very huge event. We make father camps, father and son camps, and father and daughter camps. We want to bring boys to be among men, only men. And they go away and they do whatever they want, but they are among men. But the father and daughter camp is also very, very popular. The daughters, the girls, they really like to be with men. With so many men, they take care about them. This is about strengthening the bonding, and they can experience how fantastic it is to rebond with their child. But this is a few days camp, and this is very popular. Or we tell them to go almost maybe once a year, but if they want, they can do it many times, for a theater together, but only with father. All the tickets for the, I don't know, movies and theaters, all the books are bought by women. And if the mother buys the ticket for the theater, the father just arrives and they just don't know what to do, and everything is organized by the mother. But if they go, the kids, and only with the father, they have to prepare together, they have to go there together. The play itself will give them a lot of possibility to talk about, because men sometimes they don't know what to talk about, but the kids will ask them something and they can show what they think about life. In this is a very interesting project, but if they start to experience it, they have to go home after the play and they have to talk about this. So these are small things, but a lot of people can do it without no extra money, not as a business. So these are societal suggestions for them, but we need a campaign. But more and more people are doing, and we have a very big feedbacks from them.
Thank you.
So I've thought a lot about this, so I could probably talk for a long time. So I'm going to try to be quick, but partly because of my work, but also partly because I have 3 girls, 3 daughters, and then 3 sons. So it's been interesting, and I have another daughter at the bottom. But it's been interesting to watch them and to raise them as sort of these like cohorts of one sex at a time. And so I do think that there's a way in which raising of the boys is more straightforward. Like there is like a disciplining of the lower appetites that isn't as complex as what's necessary for women. I think the object of women's attention tends to be persons instead of like sort of structures and things and like, math, whatever. And so the object of because the object of women's attention is persons are really complex. And so like, it just is complexity upon complexity. And so there is a kind of regulation that I think girls need definitely in single-sex education. I think that's a really, really important point with women especially, and sometimes men too, but women especially helping to be exemplars in that kind of ordering of the soul that I talked about that I think really does require, and I think Stein's really good on this. Stein is that that the reason and the will, like it's really good that women have rigorous education as long as it's coupled with moral education, so that it's ordered toward others. I mean, I think that that's really important. So it's not just like a self-consuming thing, like for myself, but that all of that is ordered toward kind of the good of others and concern of others. And objective work is something important. So she talks about the way in which the opposite, kind of the sort of traditional kind of tendencies or gifts of the opposite sex tend to be what helps with the kind of feminization or hyper-masculinization. So you think about this in terms of a well-integrated person. I mean, I love when you're talking about servant leader, because I think the most lovely men are the ones who have incredible interior strength, but are really gentle on the outside. Like they don't require for their respect to sort of lord it over people. You just respect them and they have a gentility about it. That's why we have the word gentleman. And I think there's also with women like just a strength, like a truth-telling and a courage that you see in highly integrated women. We see this certainly in the female saints. But I mean, I'm going to Miriam Cates here, like who's incredibly like a courageous woman, I think is something, as long as it's for the good of others, not like her own sort of self-interest. And I guess we used to have, and so it's like it's developing skills, which if you think about, like I'm reading Laura Ingalls, I don't know if people know that here, but it's like Ma and Pa, in household labor, like both had really high-skilled, very distinctive, but very high-skilled labor, which was lost, and then we want women to be high-skilled. And so it could be the work of the home, but it could also be other kinds of work, like being an economist or an attorney or whatever it is, that really exercises the mind so that the rational capacities can order the kind of emotional ones so that you can have a well-ordered soul. And I think that is a really important aspect of thinking about sort of full integration is, I think, ensuring that all the virtues are expected of each. One of the things Wollstonecraft was really big on is like, well, actually, chastity and modesty are expected of men, and that courage and kind of justice are expected of women, and that's being a full human person.
I love that answer. Thank you. So we are a bit over time, but I do want to ask one more question since we started slightly late. Emma Waters earlier in the day brought up hope in the future as a motivator for fertility and building a family and just personally, it's yes, it happens to be baked into my religion, but I think tend to be an optimistic person, which probably factors in to the fact that I've had 4 kids in 4 years. I don't know. I just have to trust God at this point. Anyway, but Emma Waters brought up hope in the future. I think that this conversation around men and women has descended into despair, especially online. It feels like men are totally despairing of their prospects with women and think that all women are, degenerate OnlyFans girlies. And women are totally despairing of their prospects in men and think that all men are addicted to only interested in the OnlyFans girlies. And so there's just this like mutual repulsion and sadness and lack of hope. Not to be too much of a downer, but my question is, what reasons do we have for hope?
Yeah, I can go fast. First, I would say get offline and go see some real people. I would just say in my own children and my children's friends and my children's boyfriends and just the way in which there's, I think, great reason. I guess I'll just give like a 30-second. So I came from a really broken home. My mom was married and divorced 3 times. I got into AA, and then that's how I got into, had a Catholic conversion. So I think like hope is really possible, and that the fact that I've been able to raise like a great family with a great man, it just gives me the hope that others, if they see the exemplars, which I think is really key, is I think one of Catherine's really beautiful talk, but like that point of like being a witness to the beauty of children and like having them around, taking them out, all of that, I think is really beautiful. And so I do think exemplars and the people I know in my life who are exemplars for myself, and then seeing my own children be far better people than me, is just, I guess that's the reason for my hope.
Brad, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that you were still here. I would have passed that first question over to you, but do you want to go ahead and take this one as well?
Sure. I'll just say 2 quick things. One on the first question, Helen, and then another on the second question. On the first question, I think kind of in response to Luis's penetrating remarks, I think one of the challenges of living in a more affluent world is that we've become soft. And so I think kind of on a day-to-day basis, the challenge for us as parents is to try to figure out ways to have our children do hard things. And, on that score, I think one of the things that, we can do more to do is to have our kids do chores around the home to kind of cultivate a certain set of virtues and, the capacity to be tougher on a number of levels. On the second question, I would say that, certainly one of the things that we've had to kind of remind ourselves in recent years is that, or we've seen in recent years, is that history does not unfold in a kind of linear way. And so I think, many of us who are of a more conservative disposition have kind of worried at some level that things are just going to get worse and worse and worse when it comes to marriage and family, for instance, or when it comes to religion. And yet we can see, I think Erica kind of mentioned this earlier today, that on the religion sort of trajectory, we've seen in the United States kind of every generation's become less religious, in recent memory. But the exception now is we're seeing some signs that Gen Z is more religious than millennials are. And so it suggests there may be a way in which, at least on the religion front, there's a bit of a rebound kind of in play, particularly for younger men. And so I think we should kind of take this as a cause for being more hopeful about the future. If we can get more young adults to kind of embrace a faith-filled approach to life, this will have, I think, clear, kind of positive consequences for family life in the U.S. and then elsewhere as well.
Well, reason for hope. A light came into the world, and the darkness has not overcome it. Right? That's at least this is a central point. And speaking to Christianity, right? The reason for my hope. The Christian faith spread through witness, through martyrdom, and through story. And so I think from my perspective, this is one of the reasons kind of for a while, conservatives have been losing the public battle is because we've focused on principles and logic, perhaps to the neglect of sort of witness, martyrdom, and story. And so I think that's one of the reasons I chose to work my research into stories, right? Because you don't just want to be right, you want to inspire. So yeah, I have a lot of hope that we can do that.
My hope is that I'm experiencing it every day, because we are working like that the personal development is open to everybody. And if we rebuild this picture, it makes it possible, because the personal development always starts with a new idea. And the new ideas are bringing new decisions. And the new decisions are building new habits. And the new habits build new personality. And this is an open, spiritually driven possibility for masses. That's why I'm working on this field. So I'm really hopeful.
Well, thank you, everyone. Oh, Louise, sorry. Go ahead.
My own Bible quote contribution to this, in Deuteronomy, choose life so that you and your descendants shall live. And I take hope in the fact that even in a cultural and political setting which is deeply antenatal, many people are finding a way and they are choosing life, not least this panel, which has a phenomenal TFR. The fact that people are still capable of doing this in these circumstances shows that life finds a way one way or another, even if the transition can be rocky.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you all again for your remarks. What an amazing panel it's been. Okay, we will move to a very short coffee break now, and if y'all could try to be back here by 3:45, that would be great. We might have to start our next event 5 minutes late, but enjoy your coffee. Well, we have another, what an honor to have yet another dignitary here with us to offer a keynote. I'd like to introduce Barbara Soha, who is an economist and demography expert with a strong corporate background in the IT industry, with over 20 years of experience in sales, marketing, and public relations. She graduated from Warsaw School of Economics with a master's degree in finance and banking and international political and economic relations. And she has finished doctoral studies in social policies there. From 2019 to 2023, she was Deputy Minister of Family and Social Policy in Poland and the first government plenipotentiary for demographic policy. And she is the author of the Polish Demographic Strategy 2040. She initiated the establishment of Generations Institute, aimed at demography research and building public policy recommendations. After closing the institute in 2024, she reopened it as the foundation, that is the Generations Institute Foundation. And she is a wife and mother of 5. Barbara, we're so happy to have you here.
Good afternoon. It's a real honor for me to be here today, representing Poland as the only person, I believe, here in the room. What I've prepared for today is just sharing very shortly the latest research. In fact, this is the first research that we have done as a foundation of Generations Institute. But because we have so many interesting topics during the day, I would like to also give you some of my remarks on comments on what was said today, what I heard today in the room. So let me go very quickly through my presentation. In fact, in the morning we heard a very similar one, comparing the US and Hungary in terms of family planning, young people attitude towards family, having children, and so on. So my presentations is similar, but with some differences. So let's go through it. It's quite new. It was done in 2023. The target group is young Poles, which we define as people between 18 and 24 years old. We started to see if in Poland we have the same problems like we see in the American literature about the mental health problems. So we see it in Poland, it's also happening, and we see a kind of dualism. So we have a group of people, quite big group, it's about 60% who say they have good life, but we have another group in which we say, we see that people are, have depression, they are not surprised with the suicides and so on and so on. So we have like two groups, still quite, I would say, quite optimistic. We have 60% of people who say they had a good life. Overall life satisfaction level is also not so bad. Only 6% of the people have that they are not, say they are not satisfied with their life. How about the relationship? We checked the relationship with the family members, and what you can see here is that generally parents are the closest persons to our young people. Please take a look at men and women, the difference in almost all the family members, boys or young men have better relationship than women. I just wonder, this is my personal opinion, whether it is also the fact that we see what you have talked about here, about the progressiveness and of young women who are more moving towards the left-wing side in our society. Free time. Young people say they have no time for relationships, they have no time for having friends. We see them that they are really busy. However, when we talked to we had some discussion panels when we talked to our young people, they say that this is sometimes the exaggeration because they spend a lot of time on mobile phones, on social media, on things like that, and they have problems with measuring it. If they checked it on the special application in the phone, probably it would look different, and many other topics, but generally it is a kind of a fashion or a trend or an attitude that we need to be busy. So if I have, being a young person in Poland, if I have a lot of free time, it means that I'm lazy. So I need to have another studies, another college, another education or something like that, some voluntary job, because it's not okay to say that I have a lot of free time. Yes, it's okay. So lack of time and responsibilities, jobs, education is the key reasons that the young people say stops them from having good relationships, building those relationships, having friends, dating. That's also what we have talked about today. How about the family aspirations? If we ask them whether they plan to have children in the future, it looks like this. So half of the young people think that 2 children is the ideal family size. 1/5 say that 3 or more. I don't want to have a kids. This is also almost a quarter, yes. So, and this is in fact happening in Poland. We have one of the highest level of childlessness. Almost 1/3 of women at the age of 40 have no children. So this is, but you know, it was always the case in Poland even before the Second World War. The level of childlessness in Poland was high. To be honest, nobody knows why. We don't have any research, any data showing or explaining why is this happening in Poland. And this is something that I want to spend a little bit more time on, the segmentation. We identified that our young people are similar and different at the same time. So we have identified 6 segments. And I will just focus on 2 of them as they are opposite in terms of the life satisfaction, life optimism, having plans for future and being believing that those plans can be fulfilled. So we have six segments, as I said. The biggest one, and this is, I think, the optimistic about our research, the biggest one is the segment that we call life and family optimists. On the opposite hand, we have people distant in relationships, and as you can see, this is one of the smallest group in Poland, but still existing. And what are the differences? What are the characteristics? So starting with people distant in relationships. They are relatively older, so from this group 18 to 24, these are the older part, coming from quite poor families or not very wealthy families. I will not go into the details, but it's a long story about our economic transformation in the 90s when we had the shocking economic therapy which resulted with decreasing the inflation but increasing dramatically the unemployment and poverty in Poland, which was lasting for decades, in fact. So the background is economic. They live far away from their hometowns. It means they probably went studying to one of the 5 big cities in Poland. And they have quite weak relationships with the family of origin. On the other side, we have this biggest group of life and family optimists. They come from intact, happy families who are relatively wealthy in Poland, so have the stable financial situation. So these are the people who didn't have the problem of surviving in terms of economic status. Probably the girls from this group didn't hear from their mothers, don't date, don't marry, focus on your career, because otherwise you will end up like me with kids and no money and so on. This is one of the myths or stereotypes that we have in Poland based on this experience from the time after the communism collapsed. And they have deep relationships with the family members, and they are optimists. They believe they can achieve what they plan, and they plan a lot. So how this looks like, I just picked only those 2 segments. When we look at the negative emotions, you can see that in this segment of life optimists, we have the least number of people who feel depressed, who sometimes feel that they lose the sense of meaning in their lives, or who feel lonely. On the opposite side, we see that in the segment of people distant in relationships, the numbers are much bigger, in some cases the biggest. So these people much more feel lonely or depressed. If we talk about positive emotions, I have a good life, I have energy, enthusiasm, and I'm a religious person. So again, look at the difference. They are dramatic differences. So we can see, based on that, I can say that it's hard to talk about the average in the whole populations, right? Those segments really are different, and people in these segments really are different. Look about having a good life in the segment of distant in relationships. Only 13% of them say they have a good life. Relationships, we checked the free time. As you see, there is no much difference, so it is not the differentiation part. Number of movings, it's probably connected to the graduation from the high school and moving to the big city for the college, for university. Number of friends, here we start to see the difference. Relationship satisfaction, again, we see here a big difference. And this is the slide that is most appalling to me, personally, I must say. If we look at the family of origin of those people, 87% of family optimists have parents who live in marriage. Only 46% of them are from this distant in relationship or socially withdrawn. So less than half of their parents are married. Take a look at how they rate the parent relationship, whether they are happy or not in their relationship, in marriage or being partners. 8.3 for the life optimists, and the lowest number, 4.9 for the distant in relationships. Good relationships, good relations with mother. We can see that generally in all the segments, people have quite good relationship with a mother, but 92% comparing to 46 for the socially withdrawn people for distant in relationship. It is a big difference. And the last but not least, in fact, I think this is one of the most important difference, is the relations with fathers. 77% of life optimists have good relations with father, only 13 13% have good relations with father in this group of people who have problems, let's say, with relationships. Desire to have kids, I will skip the first part. Desire to have kids and planned number of kids. You can see the difference. So if we could extend this segment of these life optimists, we would be on the safe side with the replacement, generations replacement level, yes? Of course, these are plans. I am also some kind of skeptical towards asking young people like 18, 19 years old about the kids, children plans, because I remember when I was that age, and if somebody asked me whether I want to have 5 kids, I would say he's crazy. So definitely it is, but it shows some trend at least. So we see that there is a problem in mental health in Poland. Also, we see this dualism that we have 2 groups of people, and I think we have some idea of why it is happening. So the intact, happy, married families, quite wealthy, not with this problem struggling with the economics in a daily life, they are the big chance to raise happy kids, kids who believe they can achieve something, who can plan family, who have the desire to have children. So that's more or less it in terms of the research, but I want to also share with you some of my personal remarks. And I put here in the slide the cover of the book, probably many of you know, from the Kevin Roberts from Heritage Foundation. It's about family fusionism, family first fusionism. I think there is a chapter about pro-family policies that I like very much. And I think Emma Waters today shared some of these points talking about the technologies that shape our cultural change. And I think that's true. And the second picture I put here, this is in Polish, this is the cover of the report that was published in Poland. It says the culture unfriendly towards maternity. I think that in the middle you have this example of the media that are antenatal. We have in Poland something like that happening very, very strongly. Almost every day I see on media, in the newspapers, in social media, the messages like, don't get into the children, it will ruin your life. Exactly that kind of messages. We have this really a lot. So I'm talking about this because we need to remember that this is the context. I mean, we have these segments of young people still in Poland, although they are all exposed to this kind of anti-family propaganda, anti-family culture. And I would really love to discuss more about the economic side. I'm an economist, so I really was happy to hear what Catherine Pekaluk was telling here before our coffee break about the economics and this comparison to horses. And I must say that generally I agree with her that the demand for children also collapsed like for the horses, but still we need children also from the economic side. And the paradox is that our, for example, social security systems, the pension systems, were designed independently from the demographic indicators, because at the time it's like 200 years already that are in place in the world. And 200 years ago, we didn't have the problem of fertility rates. So it were designed just to recognize the contribution that we individually pay while working. It didn't recognize the number of children we bring to the system in the next generation. So I think that when we talk about what we should do about fertility rates, I think that we need to, first of all, have some radical moves. We have to think big, and we have to probably design a totally new economic model for the societies, because the one that we have now is totally focused on the production of an individual person, totally devaluing the work at home, the work of bringing new generations, still being dependent on the next generation. So it's a kind of paradox that we need to solve, because otherwise we will talk about children as a gift, as a values for us, of course, and in the terms of, when we look at it from the economic point of view, it's a kind of specialization that it's quite good for the production of everything, yes? When some of the childless women, for example, in Poland, they don't have kids, but they focus on their careers, on their social contribution to the public life, and so on, that's good. And they are recognized for that. In all the steps, yes, in the income, in the pension systems, contributions, and so on. On the other side, we have wonderful women, also in Poland, who have a lot of children, who didn't have the job in terms of today's work, and they are totally not recognized. It's a kind of the specialization we need to accept. So all the lifestyles that we have now, the freedom to choose, needs to be recognized if they are in the public good. And for sure, I think we can agree that having a lot of kids instead of working or professional working, or combining that, should be somehow recognized in the whole economic model that our societies have. So we need to think big, and we need to find the new ways of solving that. And I believe that this anti-family propaganda will finish just that's why I'm an optimist, because I see that this is the first generation of the young women, for example, in Poland, who believe that they will be happy with not having children. And once they get older and older, they see that the decision was not so happy. And we can see it already in some of the research, that people who chose to be alone now feeling lonely and now say that this is not maybe the best choice I have made, because there is a Christmas time and I don't know what to do with myself, because my parents are already so old or they already died and I have nobody. So I think that this is a matter of the next generation, when people see why we need children. So I am more optimistic than maybe Catherine with this, comparing children to horses. I believe that we really need children. So, and all the people will see it, but it needs some time. We need at least one generation or two to feel it, really, to feel the results and the consequences. So I hope that we will meet in the future with the better numbers in terms of fertility rates. Thank you very much. I think I didn't...
Thank you so much, Barbara. I was so fascinated by that research and how you broke it up in terms of especially energy, like people who have a sense of energy about their lives. That's very interesting to me. So I'd love to talk to you more about that later. But I would love to welcome now Katalin Jurko, who currently serves as the Ministerial Commissioner for Promoting Intergenerational Cooperation at the Ministry of Culture and Innovation. From 2016 to 2024, she was the president of the National Association of Large Families, after previously holding the role of Secretary General. She is also a member of the National Association of Managers, and she has dedicated much of her life to community service, managing crises, securing funding, and collaborating with 1,500 to 2,000 volunteers in support of shared goals. She holds a degree in economics from Corvinus University of Budapest and speaks fluent English and French. And she has lived in Erd with her family for the past 25 years, and she is a wife and mother of 5. Gosh. So, Katalin, I'd like to welcome you to the stage for your remarks.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the possibility to speak about the system, what we see not only in the level of the government, but in the level in other places. I think the most important that I am a mother of 5, and I learn a lot from my children, and many times they give me some good ideas. So I bring a short presentation and a short movie. Maybe I need some help. Ja, arra. Oké, sorry. Azt próbáltam. Ja, köszönöm. Okay, let's start. But we try to check and see that what has a positive impact on family growth. As Minister Balázs Hankó said in the early morning, in the European Union, the total fertility rate decreased, but in Hungary, not as much as in the European Union. And as I saw in my earlier exercises, I think we need many people. We need everybody. So the first level is the Hungarian government, the second, the municipalities, the third, the local communities, and the fourth, just a local example. The Hungarian government, in last autumn and this year, the government announced a lot of measures for families, as you heard in the morning. But it's very important. From 2010, we try to solve family-centered governance, and the government built a family career path model for ladies. This model, the tax system is one part of this model, and step by step, as an economical situation allowed, we try to widen this tax system. And now the people who have 2 or more children will become a personal income tax exemption, and we will growing the amount of the family tax allowances. I think this opinion there wasn't in the people life before, and when we discussed with mothers, we got a lot of questions that really, is it true? So now we see that the people can't believe it at the moment, but from the second part of the year, it will start. The second level is the municipalities. We saw that how live the families, is it a well life or not? It decided in the municipalities level. And I brought 2 examples because we know that, for example, at Budapest, the total fertility rate is very low, but there are some good towns where the fertility rate is higher than the average in the country. For example, one of town is Sepsiszentgyörgy. Sepsiszentgyörgy is in Transylvania, but a lot of Hungarian people live there. And the other town in Hungary is Százhalombatta. And these 2 towns has many similar things. The first, both town is not too big. Százhalombatta is 18,000 people. Százhalombatta has 18,000 people inhabitants, and Sepsiszentgyörgy only 50,000 people. And both mayor take care to give job opportunities for the people who finish the school. So when the young people started the secondary technical school or other schools, the mayor calculate when we are finished and calculate that how many new factories should be go to the town and give possibilities for the young people. Because if young people have to move another town, it's settling delays having children 5 years. So if the people don't migrate, they have more children. The other things in both town that the high quality services available. So the municipalities give some help in the healthcare, and for example, there is a swimming pool, there is a theater, so a lot of really and good services available for the families. The third, that the strong communities, very, very strong cultural life. We saw both of that and very strong connection with the Hungarian culture, which is a good possibility to meet the young people each other. And the fourth is extra allowances for families. One of municipality give a card, for example, Sepsi Szentgyörgy, and the large families can free parking there. And Szászhalombatta give money for children when started the school. So there is an extra help from the municipalities to the families. And the next level is the local communities. I think it's very important that the local communities should work together with the municipalities and the government. I work the Large Families Association in Hungary, and we have more than 200 community. And we try to show our values. We try to show for another people and the young people that if we have a child or we became a mother, it's more than only live alone. So this is the one. And the other, when there is a small baby in a family, sometimes that families need some help. So I think it's very important, the grassroots organization, and it's really create a sense of community. And it's, for example, at NOAA, we can work together and we meet together with the young generation and the other, because there are parents, there are families, and there are more than 3 or more generations. And and the next example, that at Szászhalombatta, there is a folk dance group which celebrated the 40 years anniversary, and they invited nearly everybody but the founder and the youngest generations. And they prepared a very nice dance, and we celebrate together. And Szászhalombatta is the town is celebrating today the 55th birthday, because it's an industrial city, and it was established in 1970. So this is a young city. And we thought that at industrial area, not usual things, that there is a good fertility rate, but Szászhalombattan, yes. And one of this So that's why, because there is this forrás folk dance group, dance ensemble, because they have to meet the generations, meet the people, and this is a very famous folk group, and they became the heart of the city. And I bring a small film, and if it's possible, I would like to ask to start. 40 áttáncolt év megünneplését érdemes megnézni. Gyertek, tartsatok velünk! Just a feeling. Ma este egy olyan történetet ünneplünk, amely a kitartásról, az álmok valóra válásáról és a közösség erejéről szól. A mai gálaműsor különlegessége, hogy a különböző nemzedékek az alapítóktól a mostani aktív táncosokig egy színpadon ünneplik közösen ezt a csodálatos utat, amely nem csak a művészeti eredményekről szól, hanem az összefogásról és a közösség erejéről is. Ez a mai este emlékezés és tiszteletadás mindazoknak, akik hozzájárultak ennek a fantasztikus együttesnek a létrejöttéhez, és nap mint nap sokat tesznek azért, hogy a virtuális világból kiszakadva a tánc nyelvén szóljanak fiatalokhoz és idősekhez egyaránt. A Forrás Néptánc Együttes mindannyiunk számára szép példát mutat, hogyan lehet álmodni, kitartani és közösen építeni valami igazán nagyot. Sorry, it's not the good version because we made a translation in English language. But the main message that they dreamed and worked together in really great things. And when the young people dancing together and meet together and discuss each other, it means that they put down the mobile phone and put down the virtual life, and we try to bring them in the real life. And I think if we lost the young generation, we will lose the future. So to be more children, we need give alternative programs for the young generations. For example, dance, for example, sports, for example, reading a good book. Okay, so thank you. The conclusion was the last slide, only that every level of the system should be involved, and where the child lives, there the future lives. So thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, Katalin. I know one of my children's favorite parts of being in Budapest was the folk dancing, so they really enjoyed that. Okay, once again, an incredible honor to introduce our next speaker. Miriam Cates is a presenter for GB News and a senior fellow at the Center for Social Justice. Between 2019 and 2024, Miriam was a Conservative member of the UK Parliament. She champions interests concerning children and family, including raising awareness of the need to raise fertility rates and leading campaigns to protect children online. Miriam was born in the north of England, studied natural sciences at Cambridge University, and worked as a secondary school science teacher before entering politics. Miriam is married with 3 children.
Thank you, Helen, and it's great to be here. And one of the disadvantages of coming at the end of the day is that most of what I'm about to say has been said already. So I don't know whether that is reassuring or irritating, but I'll let you decide. And it is really wonderful to be amongst friends, because being a pronatalist in Britain is a very, very lonely business. And when I tell people in London that I have 3 children, they look at me as if I'm absolutely crazy. Whereas I come places like this and 3 children is at the very low end of the distribution. So I also wish I had one more. But in Britain, we are famously adept at talking about everything except what really matters. We love talking about the weather. We love talking about Prince Harry and whether he's going to bring out a new book. And until very recently in Britain, it's been almost impossible to have conversations about these important things: low birth rates, immigration. I think Erica mentioned earlier that I've been brave. All she means is that I've actually stood up and said that children are good. And for that, I have been called far right and all sorts of other things. But this is, or at least was until very recently, the media culture in Britain. Yet underneath that superficiality of our obsession with the weather and the royal family, the UK is facing exactly the same demographic crises as our European neighbours, or the continental nations, as we like to refer to you, as if we are somehow incontinent. Anyway, the UK has, like everywhere else in Europe, we've had below replacement birth rates since the 1970s. In the 1960s, in our baby boom, very similar to the US, nearly 1 million babies were born each year. But in 2023, Britain recorded fewer than 600,000 births. So RTFR is also about 1.4. Now, in Britain, unlike in Hungary and much of Eastern Europe, mass immigration has masked low birth rates to some extent, although that has created equally difficult and very unpopular problems. But despite that, we are still now seeing the problems associated with low birth rates. Schools are closing. A maternity hospital in London announced this week that it's shutting down. No babies are being born there. There are labour shortages in many sectors. Taxes are higher than they've ever been. Now, it's not that babies aren't being conceived. In the UK, we have 200,000 abortions a year, a number which just today the Leader of the Opposition has said, oh, there's nothing wrong with the abortion system, they're safe, legal and rare. Well, 200,000 is not rare. In fact, that is the difference between the number of babies we need to have a TFR of 2.1 and the TFR that we have today. So if every pregnancy delivered a live baby, we wouldn't have a birth gap in Britain. But of course, in Britain, just like everywhere else, particularly in the United States, birth rate decline has followed the decline of marriage. And now, as Fiona Bruce was saying this morning, my former colleague, we both lost our seats in July, sadly. But nearly half of British children experience parental separation by the age of 14. I think it was 8% in the 1960s. Now it's nearly half. So 2.5 million British children are growing up without a father figure at home. You are far more likely in the UK as a child to have a smartphone than you are to have a dad. And obviously that is an extremely concerning trajectory. We've just published a big report in the UK called Lost Boys, which looks at all the problems that we have with young boys growing up without positive role models for masculinity, something that's been discussed today. But of course, the upshot of this is we don't have enough babies, we don't have enough families. Our national debt is already 100% of GDP. And because of that ageing society, in just 50 years' time, it's projected to be 270% of GDP. Completely unaffordable. We're facing a future of inflation and stagnation and shortages. And so that's why we're all here today. How do we fix this problem? And are the answers purely economic? And that's what we've been discussing today. Of course, financial incentives are really important. And as Philip Pilkington, who's sitting there, said, you know, people would have a baby for £1 million. Of course they would. There is at some level at which economic incentivization would solve this. But, unfortunately, that's not realistic. Otherwise, I'd be very wealthy. And some of you would be even more wealthy than me. But I think the decision to have a child has much more in common with a biological process than an economic one. Now, I take the point that's being made earlier that it isn't a purely biological process. Of course not. But it is very analogous to a biological process because the results depend on the conditions, the social and cultural conditions, in the case of birth rates, rather than the kind of purely biological conditions for a more organic process. Now, as has already been said, I did used to be a high school biology teacher, and one of the topics that always provoked the most groans amongst my students was photosynthesis. Now, there does seem to be something rather boring about plants, and I can see you all glazing over already. But nevertheless, photosynthesis is a really, really wonderful example of a complex but highly sensitive biological process. So what is photosynthesis, for those of you who are desperate to know? Well, quite literally, it's the process by which plants create their own food. So they harness light energy from the sun to convert carbon dioxide from the air and water from the soil into glucose. And without this glucose, plants couldn't grow, and there would be no life on Earth because birds and mammals and fish can't take things from the air and turn it into food, Only plants can do that, and so, of course, plants are the ultimate food source. Are you still awake? Okay, we've got photosynthesis. But photosynthesis, like all biological processes, only happens in the right conditions. There's got to be enough light of the correct wavelength to catalyse the reactions. Plants, very obviously, don't grow in the dark. And the more light there is, the greater the rate of photosynthesis. There's got to be enough carbon dioxide in the air for the plants to take in and turn into food. The more carbon dioxide there is, the more the rate of photosynthesis. There's got to be enough water and essential minerals in the soil, and the temperature must be just right. Too low, the reactions don't happen. Too high, and to preserve water, the leaves will shut the tiny little pores that allow the carbon dioxide in to stop the water getting out. And of course, in extreme heat, the enzymes that make the reactions happen just die completely. The plant is scorched, it will die. So if there's sufficient carbon dioxide, light, water and heat, the plant will grow. And if the conditions are perfect, plants can grow very, very fast indeed. Bamboo, in the right conditions, can grow 1 metre in a day, thanks to photosynthesis. Now, a bit like photosynthesis, having children is very obviously a biological process. And of course, as we've said, the analogies are not perfect, and human beings have free will. Plants can't decide to stop photosynthesizing just because they're not in the mood. But reproducing, I do think, is the most natural thing in the world in the right cultural conditions. And the fact that people still are having children, the fact that most women still do have children, even though our fertility rate is obviously below replacement rate, despite the cultural headwinds, I think shows just what a natural process it really is. So in a poll that I commissioned in the UK a couple of years ago, we found that 92% of young women still want children, and on average they want 2 or 3. Now, I completely take the point that that's an expressed preference, not a revealed preference, but nevertheless, it shows that despite all the anti-family propaganda that we're experiencing, people still do think that an ideal is to have a family. So how are we going to recreate the optimum circumstances, the perfect climate, if you like, in which this dream becomes reality? What are the human, social, political and economic conditions that are similar to the idea of just the right level of carbon dioxide, water and heat that will optimise birth rates? Well, I think the first condition, and we talked about this a lot today, is strong families. And the Western family model, of course, has the nuclear family, mum, dad, children, at its heart. And I think there are 3 pillars that underpin that model that, until about 50 or 60 years ago, held pretty strong in the Western world. And they are a belief in the sacred value of children, a commitment to lifelong marriage, and an understanding of the importance of parental authority. Now, those 3 ideas aren't kind of natural ones. The Romans routinely practiced infanticide. Lots of ancient cultures sacrificed their children to the gods. Children weren't seen as particularly sacred. They weren't all seen as worth saving. And the idea of marriage, that a man should remain faithful to just one woman, would have seemed pretty absurd in the ancient world. But the teachings of Christianity, built on Jewish heritage, of course, have normalised those ideas in the West, putting children and children's welfare at the centre of society, conferring status on marriage and parenthood, and emphasising respect for parental authority. Of course, that is what has been at the centre of a strong nuclear family for so long. But all of those pillars have been eroded, particularly in the last 50 years. The liberalisation of abortion laws, the expectation that all women will use contraception, has meant that children are now seen as a choice and not a blessing. And so therefore their worth is no longer intrinsic, it's no longer unquestionable. The value of a child depends on whether or not his life is wanted by others. That is a huge psychological shift. So if children aren't seen as special or sacred to society, of course, parenthood is going to lose its special status. And so it will fall down the list of young people's priorities. It's exactly what's happened. Marriage has been eroded. We've already talked about that. For the first time since records began, more British adults aren't married than are. And of course, that has a huge impact on fertility rate. But I think what's really significant as well is that parental authority has been eroded so much in recent years. It's been eroded by the state through public schooling that teaches all sorts of values that parents don't necessarily agree with but have no choice about. It's been eroded by liberalism, which tells parents that they're not allowed to discipline their children and encourages children to break free from their parents' guidance. And most of all, parental authority has been completely eroded by the internet. Because throughout history, we have really tightly controlled who and what can access our children, because we know that children are vulnerable, they're impressionable, and if we want them to grow up with the values and virtues and characteristics and skills that we hold dear, the influences on them in their young life must be good ones. Yet now our children can encounter the worst evil and lies and all the other sorts of horrors that we've been talking about today in the safety of their own bedroom. Now, is it any surprise that prospective parents look at this failure of parental authority and they're filled with trepidation? Because without the expectation of parental authority, without the expectation that your children will obey you and respect you, raising children becomes a very, very high-risk project. Why do people prefer puppies to children? Because dogs don't reject their parents. They don't experiment with drugs, and they don't change their gender in adolescence. You can predict what's going to happen if you buy a puppy. No longer the case with raising a child. So I think strong families are an absolutely essential cultural condition to higher birth rates. And that's the three pillars of sacred children, monogamous marriage, and parental authority. But that's not enough, because the nuclear family was never expected to bear the burden of raising children alone. The three pillars of the family stood on that firm foundation of a culture that accepted collective responsibility for raising the young. As apparently Hillary Clinton said, I found out today, it takes a village to raise a child. And of course that's true. The efforts of parents always used to be supported and reinforced by civic society, by the church, by the extended family, by the state, in this collective effort to raise the next generation. But a lot of that has again been eroded, partly for economic reasons, people moving away from their families, of course. But also there's been this shift to see now parenting as a private endeavour. It's something that you undertake at your own risk. It's a bit like buying an expensive car. If you can afford it, you do it, but you're going to have to look after it. Nothing to do with me. But now parenting is seen as private, but policed by the state, which is completely different to how it used to be, which was a community endeavour where everybody had the same ideas and helped look after each other people's children. Now, unlike for other animals, human parenting is not particularly instinctive. I mean, we got kittens last year, and they were actually taken off their mother very young. They're rescue kittens, but they know exactly how to be cats, and they know exactly how to parent cats, because it's totally instinctive, because cats are born at a much later stage of development. Sorry, I'm going back into biology teacher mode then. But human parenting isn't instinctive. It has to be learned from others. How we see other parents parenting, how our own parents parented, completely affects how we parent our own children. Now, a really good example of that is toilet training. What other mammal has to teach their offspring bladder control? They don't, because human beings are born, again, at such an early stage of development that their brains and bodies are not able to do that yet. So we actually have to teach it. And potty training isn't easy. It involves stress and tears and tantrums, and that's just from the parents. It's true, I've done it 3 times, it did work, but hats off to those of you who've done it 7, 8, 9 times, incredible. And I remember with my first child spending 6 months just talking about potty training with all my mum friends before any of us dared to try it. But now so many mothers are forced back into the workplace by financial necessity. Now so many parents parent alone. Now that intergenerational, communitarian approach to parenting has all but disappeared, many mums and dads just don't know how to begin the process of potty training. They don't even know that it's their responsibility. And last year in the UK, 25%, a quarter of 4 and 5-year-olds starting school were not potty trained. A quarter. That would be unheard of a generation ago. And that is the consequence of individualising and privatising the role of parents. It's become a high-risk, private venture. And if we want young people to conceive and give birth to the next generation, we've got to restore a sense of shared responsibility, collective endeavour to the parenting process, because you cannot do it alone. So family and fellowship, this idea of being together, are essential environmental conditions for raising children. But so is faith. And yes, we've talked about today how religious faith is helpful, and it provides real and practical support. It provides the philosophical and moral framework around why children are good, of course. So active Christian faith is absolutely a good environmental condition for higher birth rates. But I do think we also need a more general faith a societal faith, a faith in the future, faith that our children's lives will be good, faith that we will have enough economic and social resources to raise them well, faith that having children will make us richer, emotionally and materially, and not poorer. And in so many ways, our nations have lost that faith. We've certainly lost the expectations that future economic conditions might be good. Since the 1970s, the inflation of money and asset prices and the normalisation of public and private debt has robbed many young people of the opportunity of buying a house. And I think also, although our young people might on paper be just as wealthy or even wealthier than previous generations, starting life with debt, national debt, private debt, is a very different thing to having the opportunity available that things might get better when we absolutely know, sadly, on the current trajectory, things are going to get worse. And in the UK, we have socialised the cost of old age through publicly funded pensions and healthcare, but we've privatised the cost of raising children. And one of the speakers raised this earlier. And the problem with that is that we've completely broken the link between having children and future economic security. And in the past, people had children because you had to work on your farm or look after you in old age or help around the house. And yet now, you will get a pension and healthcare whether or not you have children. But if you have children yourself, it's on you to pay the cost of raising them alone. And I don't think there is any way forward for raising fertility rates unless we restore that link. Not saying we end all pensions or anything like that, but there has to be some individual economic benefit, some personal economic benefit to having children, rather than socialising the benefits of your hard work and investment, but making everybody who doesn't have children still gets a pension. I just think unless you restore that link, we are never going to restore healthy birth rates. Also, the rising cost of living has meant that more and more women have been forced into the workplace, even when their babies are really tiny. And that is something that few women, particularly when babies are tiny, actually want. And of course, babies want it even less. And we know that particularly for under threes, full-time institutional childcare is probably not the best thing. And actually, most women of babies would actually prefer to spend time with their children. If your only prospect is to have a baby, go back to work in 6 weeks, work from 8 till 6 and never see your child, again, doesn't give you great faith for the future of motherhood. Faith in the future isn't about an absence of uncertainty, and previous generations faced far greater risks, didn't they, of hunger and war and disease, far greater risks than we face. And yet they still maintained a hope and faith for the future and a sense of purpose and duty to continue that golden thread that runs from one generation to the other. And as the West faces an identity crisis, of course, that is exactly what we're grappling with. Do we really owe anything to the future? And I think many young people think at the moment, no, they probably don't. So we need family, fellowship, we need faith, but we also need the facts. And if we want young people to choose to become parents, it's important that they know the facts about fertility and family. Because when the facts are distorted, the truth is replaced by fear. And we've already had those appalling Polish examples of anti-family propaganda, but it's just the same in the UK. The NHS, the National Health Service, had an advert a couple of weeks ago for the morning after pill that showed a picture of a stiletto, and it said, and a lipstick. Why would you swap this, party girl, for, and it was a dirty nappy and a dummy. Why would you give up all this fun to have such a terrible time as a mother? Make sure you take the morning after pill. That's the kind of propaganda that our National Health Service is putting out to young people. And of course, women, all children, are taught that career is the only path to fulfilment, that marriage is a thing of the past, and young women are told, they have been for the last 30 years, that getting pregnant is the worst thing that can possibly happen to you. And last week, The Times, which is one of our biggest newspapers, published an article that claimed that 2/3 of young women think that motherhood can be detrimental to their career. Now, at the bottom of the article, 500 words down, it said that just 4% of the mothers they surveyed regretted having children, and that 90% of the mothers said that although motherhood was tough, it was absolutely worthwhile. But you have to read to the bottom to get the truth. And so our headlines are publishing this relentless messaging of negativity about parenthood. And they're full of stories of women who celebrate their childlessness, even though we know that that is a tiny fraction of the numbers of women who regret childlessness. And few people know the facts about the birth rate crisis. Just today, there's an article in the Times again by a well-known journalist who's basically finally worked out what a TFR of 1.4 actually means. And she says, as a non-mathematician, it never occurred to me that that means that each generation is a third smaller than the one before. She just thought, next generation we won't have so many people and then things will get back to normal. This is what most people think. Most people in Britain think that a declining birth rate is a good thing. They still believe that the world is overpopulated, that it's going to carry on increasing exponentially, and that people are destroying the planet. Even the indisputable facts about fertility are being distorted. That same poll I referred to showed that 2/3 of young women think that it's fine to wait to the age of 35 before you start a family, and that thanks to modern technology, you can have a baby at any age. These things are demonstrably untrue, and yet the majority of young women believe them. And that is a really important thing to understand. Without the facts about what is actually happening, how can young people make informed decisions about their future fertility and the family? Before we make big decisions as people, we do want to know the facts. If you're trying to buy a car or hire a builder, you look at all the reviews. If the good reviews are hidden at the bottom and you only see the bad reviews, you're not going to buy. And yet that is exactly what's happening with the propaganda, anti-family propaganda. So family, fellowship, faith and facts, those are the cultural conditions, the atmosphere in which I think fertility rates will naturally increase. So how do we restore those conditions? Well, here in Hungary, you're obviously doing an incredible job trying to restore the economic conditions that mean you're not worse off having children, and trying to be more family friendly, which I think is fantastic. But just like in nature, we must avoid the extremes. Elon Musk has already been mentioned. Yes, it's great he's sounding the alarm for population collapse, but his model of repopulation is a pre-Christian, pre-civilization one, where one man has lots of women and many, many children, and even uses surrogacy, which is the practice of deliberately depriving a child of its mother. And I personally think that's just anti-human, and it's not a model that any of us should be seeking to emulate. But next. But I'm not saying it's a good thing he's raising attention to the problem, but his solution is not one that I care for. And on the left, another extreme, calling for more free childcare, more gender pay equity, whatever that means, perfect equality between men and women. That's also at odds with the facts of life and the natural differences between men, women and children. So we've got to avoid those extremes. But instead, we should use every cultural and economic and spiritual tool at our disposal to promote those ideas: sacredness of children, monogamous marriage, the authority of parents. And we've got to change the culture that our children are growing up in. Yes, the antenatal propaganda, but also particularly their exposure to the internet, and we've spoken about that today. We cannot possibly expect that children who grow up exposed to pornography, who grow up exposed to lies, are going to suddenly turn into happy, well-adjusted individuals who are going to want to get married and have children. And quite frankly, I cannot believe that we tolerate children watching extreme pornography. And I cannot believe that conservatives, so-called conservatives, in my own country think this is a private matter and think that there's nothing you can do and that horse is bolted, or as another horse analogy there, they haven't all gone. No, the horse hasn't bolted. Every time there's a technological revolution, children get harmed. It happened in the Industrial Revolution. It happens all the time. And every so often, society finds a way to restrict that technology in order to protect children. And yes, that might curtail some adult freedoms, but it's absolutely worth it. And now is such a moment. We've got to stop children coming across and watching pornography. It is destroying them, boys and girls. And we've got to get the antenatal messaging out of schools. Instead of telling children the worst thing you can do is get pregnant, start telling them about fertility and how it actually works from a biological point of view. And let's do some more research. How many billions of dollars have we spent researching climate change or gender fluidity? Why not research some of the things that actually help improve birth rates? Some great work going on in Hungary, but absolutely nothing happening in Britain, and I'm sure other countries as well. So we've got to find a way to restore these conditions that I think will naturally lead to higher birth rates. Amazing stuff happening here in Hungary, just like with biological processes. Small differences in climate can make a big difference. It will require cost. It will require buy-in from the older generation, who are going to have to recognise that as the boomers, they had everything except enough children, and now they're going to have to make sacrifices for the benefit of the young and not yet born. But there isn't an alternative, because without these things, without families and fellowship and faith and the truth, we're not going to have more children. And as we all know here, without children, we just don't have a future. Thank you.
Yes, this is our final panel for the day. So it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the panel, who will go on to introduce the panelists aside from Ms. Cates here. Philip Pilkington is a macroeconomist and former investment professional. He's the author of The Reformation in Economics and the forthcoming The Collapse of Global Liberalism. His writing has appeared in numerous outlets, including The Telegraph, The New York Post, American Affairs, Post-Liberal Order, Money Week, The Spectator, and Unheard. And he is the co-host of the Multipolarity podcast. So, Philip, I'll turn it over to you. Enjoy.
Thank you, Ellen. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm apparently the £1 million economist baby guy, so that's really credibility boosting. Thank you, Mary. Little bit of hyperinflation at my cause, but there are worse things. Joined with me on the panel today are Miriam Cates, who we've just seen, GB News presenter, Conservative Member of Parliament, former Conservative Member of Parliament. We have next, Eric Almquist, the former Swedish MP. Sorry, notes are terrible here. Anna Naj, former founder, chair of the board, Single Parents Centre, and Andras Pari, scientific vice president, Maria Cope Institute for Demography and Families. So we're at, I think, the end of the day. I was going to maybe try and discuss a little bit about the family policies themselves, if that's okay. I mean, we have kind of a panel of two politicians and two kind of people who've been working on the policy directly or thinking about it directly. So I guess we could start with something I think is actually the key of the family policy debate now. The family policy debate has come quite far, at least in the English-speaking world, from where it was 2 to 3 years ago, where it basically didn't exist. You were thought of kind of a weirdo, like a eugenicist or something, if you talked about it, which is completely bizarre, but that's where we were. And it's not there anymore. People are talking about it now. But now the kind of criticisms have started to come out, and I think the main criticism that I'm seeing is kind of what you might call a technocratic criticism, where they say, well, show me one that's actually worked. Show me a completely successful, perfect family policy. And it kind of raises a lot of questions. I won't go into the specific data of Hungary. I think doubling of the marriage rate is pretty good start, actually, over just the course of 10 years. But, I guess opinions differ on that. But I suppose it's become a debate now. It's being criticized for this. So starting with you, Miriam, how would you actually envisage, what is a good family policy and how do you communicate it? And I want to say, how do you measure it? But I don't mean that. I mean that however way you want.
I mean, it is an incredibly difficult question to answer, because if you're thinking about it from a scientific point of view, you'd need some sort of fair test where you can compare two different cultures that have only one different variable, and that's just totally impossible in the human world. But I think, the UK is so far behind on this. We have no family-friendly policies whatsoever. We even have anti-family policies. So if you earn over a certain amount, you lose all your child benefit. If you are poor and you have a third child, you don't get any benefit for a third or subsequent child unless you can prove you've been raped. I mean, it's horrific, the policy in the UK, it really is. So any improvement on that would be good. But I suspect, thinking about it from a more kind of policy point of view, is that we shouldn't measure too early. I think the example of Hungary is really interesting. The marriage rate improvement surely is a brilliant indicator for fertility in 5 or 10 years' time. But there's no reason why it should have an immediate jump in births. So good family policy should be where you're not poorer or not significantly poorer for having children, where the state recognises and society recognises the contribution you make to raising children is just as important as the contribution you make in the workplace. And I think in terms of what's a good one, too early to tell.
Eric, would you like to weigh in on that maybe?
Yeah, first of all, I want to also add that Merjam, I think, just raised a new policy suggestion that I think has never been tried anywhere else, and that's the state-funded potty training programs. So maybe that's the last.
That goes with the £1 million a baby. Yeah, we're working hard here, guys.
No, but I think, as Merjam said, you have to look at these policy programs from in a cultural context. For example, the Hungarian Families Policy Program has been addressing an issue for many young Hungarians, and that is that it's unaffordable to buy their first family home. While, for example, if you look at South Korea and East Asia, we know that women there in general don't really want to have more children. So then they first and foremost are facing a cultural issue, an issue of values. While in Europe, the average woman wants to have maybe 2.3 children, approximately. In America, 2.5. My home country is Sweden, where in Sweden, the 25% of the women who have the highest incomes, they have on average 2.3 children, which also suggests that those who can actually afford to start early and have the family and the number of kids you want, they actually also do it. So I think one important thing for European family policy has to be to extend the middle class, to help the lower middle class to be able to fulfill the same dream of having a family and start early as those with the better financial means can. And also remember that financial means is not only about what you can buy for money materialistically or when it comes to houses. It's also about the fact that with time you can also afford more money, because more time. With money you can afford more time, which is something you really want when you raise children, because as Merjam was talking about, you don't want to give birth and then 2 months later go back to work. You want to be able to spend time with your family to make it, the quality.
Anna, perhaps you could weigh in on the Hungarian.
I think that there are two sides when we talk about why a good family policy is essential. From the parents' point of view, it is important that they will feel that living in a family is good, that they don't get poor, that they don't lose their, objective in life, that living in a family is something positive. And I think from the children's point of view, to feel the same, that when they grow up, they will want to live in a family. And I think it's a very important issue. For the first part, that living in a family is good, in Hungary, 200,000 babies more were born because due to the changes, the family policy changes. And I think 200,000 babies, that's quite a nice number. That's quite a good result. I think having one baby in this room since this morning, I think she just made our day. Can you imagine 200,000 babies? And I think from the children's point of view, I'd like to add one more aspect that hasn't been mentioned today or just partially, and this is the question of single-parent families. I've been working with single-parent families for 20 years. And I think for our children, it is very important to show that even though life can bring some difficulties sometimes, that sometimes life works in a different way from what we planned before, still family is something positive. And I think this is something that family policies should show, that even if a family becomes like single-parent families, or they become patchwork families, still living in a family is good. And I think this is important.
Andras, perhaps you could say it from a demography point of view.
I would step one step back. For family policy, good family policy, what is important and why is it important? Demography. And demography is the focus. The family policy and policy makers work on demographic data, statistics. And we see from the national data, from the Eurostat data, what's happening in Europe and what's happening in Hungary. And I think that's the data-driven, data-based, evidence-based researches are very important. And I work at a governmental background institute, and the population growth, fertility rate, number of childbirths is very important to see what's happening. And the aging index is very important, which shows that the aging population is getting a higher number comparing with the number of children. And these are a kind of mammoth data or a tank data. They are started to they started in some decades ago, and we will see what will happen in the next decades. So demographics and statistics are very important for policies and for family policy.
Okay, I'd like to move on to some of the kind of second order aspects of the policy. I know this might seem like it's getting a little technical, but as I said, the debate is kind of moving ahead on this, and it's interesting to see kind of where it's going and maybe generate some ideas about how we're going to communicate it. So Hungary is in a less bad position than many of the Western countries in terms of their government debt to GDP. It's only about 60% here, maybe 64 or something like that. Most Western countries are pushing 100. Some of this is due to aging, and that's only really being talked about now. I mean, Miriam, you said in your example that Britain is I think, what did you say, 270%? It's a prediction for 50 years' time. And those predictions are perfectly reasonable. Japan is the oldest society in the world. It's got a 260% debt to GDP. I mean, I find it fascinating as an economist that treasuries all over the world are bean counting every last penny and don't realize the elephant in the room, that an aging population just absolutely blows everything out of the water. It increases spending, tax revenues fall, the economy stagnates. To me, it's absolutely bonkers that we're not talking about this. But I suppose that's a kind of a technical economic, I mean, I wouldn't say it's too technical, but how do you kind of, this goes to what I think someone that was saying in their speech, that how do you actually communicate that to people? That if you're trying to communicate an economic message and you say, like, it's bad that people don't work, there's an instinctive, like, welfare is bad. There's an instinctive thing there which they say, oh yeah, of course it's bad because I work and they don't. How do you communicate something like this? Because it's a lot worse than welfare dependency. I mean, maybe you've had some experience with it.
Well, I think it is difficult for a number of reasons. Firstly, most people's mathematical literacy is not very high, and that's why this TFR thing doesn't catch on. It's much easier to say 100 British people alive today will only have 44 grandchildren between them. That's the kind of reframing of the message that I think that helps. I think economists have learnt, you accept it obviously, Philip, have learnt completely the wrong lessons from growth in the past. They've thought it's to do with some mystical productivity variable, whereas mostly, as you've shown in a paper recently, it's just demographic booms. But we've taken it to mean that Thatcherism was amazing, or this kind of thing was amazing. It's not. It's just we had more people and they all came of age in the 1980s, and great, we had a boom. So I think we've learnt the wrong lessons. But I think that what's missing from this message, and a really sticky message, one that really catches on quickly, and we know that there are messages that do that, otherwise why would people spend billions of dollars on marketing? We know that marketing and communication works. But the difference is, what is in it for me? And I think that's what's been spoken about today, is that people are waking up to the birth rate crisis, but why should I personally be responsible for fixing it? And I think it's a very reasonable question to ask. And the reason it's a question at all is, as I said in my speech, we've severed the link between having children and economic security. And if we had to, from necessity, cut back on pensions, cut back on welfare, well, we're going to have to, then there will be a personal incentive to have children. Especially if we front load the benefits through child benefit, tax credits, etc., like Hungary's doing, and then people will sit up and take notice. But while it's a kind of, the world is burning, but you get on with your own life, I just don't think the message is going to stick.
I think that's absolutely correct, because a lot of people, another part of the public debate at the moment is, well, it's really mean to give people with children money or tax. I mean, we're not actually talking about taxing childless people, maybe we won't do that, but those things are mean. Yeah. No, actually what you're doing is you're softening the blow of reality, because eventually the pension system's not going to work, actually, and it's going to be really, really grim. So training people's expectations in that regard and making them make the right decisions is actually the humane thing to do. Eric, I'm really fascinated with the case of Sweden, actually, because Sweden is the state that kind of founded the modern welfare state. We could talk about Bismarck's Germany and so on, but the real social democratic model welfare state was founded in Sweden, and it was actually, won't go too much into history, but it was founded by the Myrdals, the couple called the Myrdals, Gunnar Myrdal and Alva Myrdal, and there was an economist and a sociologist, and one of the things Gunnar Myrdal said specifically was, this welfare state is built for a country with above replacement rate births, and he was quite skeptical of immigration. But that message seems to be lost in Sweden. People are really in favour of the welfare state in Sweden. It's a slightly different place to most of the rest of southern Middle Europe, whatever you want to call it. Do people understand that their welfare state will not work if this continues? And if not, how do you make them understand that?
People don't understand it, neither in Sweden or in the rest of Europe or the Western world. And I think, for me, one word comes to mind when it comes to how to awaken people, and that's more scaremongering. Because scaremongering works. Look at the climate question. Look how much money people are willing to pour at the climate change, at weather. And this is because the left is really good at scaremongering. Unfortunately, conservatives, we don't like the idea of scaring people. We want to be serious and moderate and more reasonable. But I think there's something to learn here, because this is really a subject where scaremongering is justified. We should paint pictures of empty schools and cities falling apart because the house is getting abandoned, and old people walking there, nobody looking after them. Because this is the actual reality if this trend goes on and it's not turned around anytime soon.
Yeah, more scaremongering. I'm in favour of it. Anna, what's the situation in Hungary? Obviously, I said at the beginning, Hungary is actually not in a terrible economic situation at the moment. Some of the Western countries are really getting there quite quickly. But do they link the two things? Has the Hungarian government been successful linking those two things? Or is it purely thought of from a family poll, just kind of from a more personal point of view?
I think it's very difficult to divide personal and social sides when it comes to families. Of course, we talk about families as something, about future, about economics, about this and that. But basically, this is all a very personal thing. And in the morning, somebody mentioned, arriving to the Hungarian airport and seeing a family-friendly country. So being a family-friendly country, I think it was you. Thank you very much, because we are very proud of it. It is written in very, very many languages, and I think it's very important when you come here, it is just obvious that you can have children. You don't have to feel ashamed of it. You don't have to feel inferior. You don't have to feel that your life is over just because you have a family. And I think to get this message through from your personal life, from a social or a political point of view, I think this is the most important and probably the most difficult part as well, so that people can feel in their everyday life that family is something which is a priority in Hungary, and I think it has been a priority for many years now.
So, András, I'd like to ask you the question from a slightly different point of view. I know the sins of the economists all too well, that they've neglected this issue for so long. Could give a whole lecture on it, but we won't. But do demographers see that this economic link and how catastrophic it could be? And if they don't, why? And if they do, why don't they talk about it more?
Demography and economic connects very strongly. Maybe everybody knows what the age pyramid is. If we look at the age pyramid of the European Union or in Hungary, we have just published a new research with two colleagues of mine in an English publication, and we have found that the Hungarian age pyramid is very stable under the age 15 population. This shows that there will be a stable population for the next 15 or 20 years. Those young people who are under the age of 15 will go to school, or they are also in the school. They will go to the university and they move to the workforce. That's a stable population. Since 2010 until the last year, there were 90,000 children born in Hungary, so that will cause this stable population. But if you look on the Hungarian age pyramid, we can see the Ratko era population and the Ratko grandchildren era. Those people who were born at these eras in the 1950s and in the 1970s, those cohorts are a large cohort but they took a very high pressure on the social policies and the family policies, because they were a very numerous population, and then there was a population decrease or a birth decrease. So back to the first question, economy and demography, it's linking. So it's a very important question.
Well, that's good to hear. I just want to share a little tiny piece of research that took place in Hungary last week that might get people kind of talking or thinking a little bit. So the Hungarian economist Géza Sebastian, who's at MCC and I think Corvinus University, showed that it was a very simple exercise, but he just showed that if you took the family policy subsidies, which are now for mothers with 2 children and mothers under 30 with 1, if you're a mother, basically, I mean, assuming you're a mother of 2 by 32 or something like that, for the most part, if you're a mother in Hungary now, the income tax allowance eliminates the gender pay gap, which is kind of fascinating. Now, I thought that was really interesting. I messaged Géza and I said, well, we know that that's what creates the gender pay gap in the first place. This is an ongoing debate online. This is kind of the woke wars stuff. But of course, the reality is the gender pay gap is mostly caused by women having children. But I thought it was such an interesting point that you could resolve the gender pay gap with family policy. That's the kind of fascist family policy that the left accuse us of wanting to do. I suppose, I mean, if anyone wants to reflect on that itself, I just think it's a really interesting nugget. But I think more broadly, like, how do we get behind those debates and like completely turn them upside down, like showing that, you know, the what the feminists actually want is actually family policy or something like that.
Well, I do. It's a brilliant policy for that reason, in that it beats them at their own game. And of course, what the left accuse us of is wanting to send women back to the kitchen and force them to stay at home. Well, you only benefit from an income tax cut if you go out to work. So I think it's a superb policy politically as well as hopefully economically and demographically. But I think the key point that I always make is that we are not, in Western Europe, but maybe different in places like South Korea, we are not trying to force women to have children that they don't want. We're trying to help them realise their dreams of motherhood, their stated dreams of motherhood, to have as many children as they say they want, and also to prevent what is a serious social crisis of women getting to their late 40s and early 50s and seriously regretting and being very, very depressed and sad about not having had children. And if that's not a feminist aim to help women achieve their dreams, I don't know what is. So I think communicated like that, and of course you have to keep repeating these things and keep explaining again, you know, that's the nature of political messaging. But I think, put it like this, we are trying to help women achieve their dreams. That's how we say it. And then one more point, which is the obsession, particularly in North and Western Europe, with institutionalised childcare. The left roll this out again and again and again. This is the answer to the gender pay gap. This is the answer to low fertility. We've just got to have more institutionalised childcare. Poor women don't use it. We're not entirely sure why. And it's really bad for babies. And people instinctively know that. And so I think we just need to publish much more research about how important the mother-baby bond is in the first year or two, that it's pro-baby, pro-woman, to allow that maternity leave, to fund that maternity leave. I think that's an important message too. But I don't think there are any easy answers. It's just about nailing the message and then repeating it.
I've always thought the funny thing about the institutionalized childcare is most of the carers are women. So you're just making them do the same work and you're monetizing the relationship, which is just kind of freakish.
Yeah, and then every time more women go into the workplace, you need more people to care for children and old people. It's just a Ponzi scheme.
It's a complete Ponzi scheme. And the same, women are still doing the same childcaring work. It's completely bizarre to me.
The Treasury wins, though.
The Treasury wins and private companies win, but anyway, we won't get into that. So, I mean, I'd put the same kind of vague question to you in terms of Sweden. I mean, Sweden, first of all, obviously has a very focused welfare state on what Miriam's talking about. I know there's been a lot of focus in Sweden about childcare, and also, of course, one of the modus operandi of the social democratic state in Sweden is to promote feminist values. So how do you see communicating it over that or under that or through that?
To start with, I would like to also straighten out the misconception, because Sweden might have been early with building a solid modern welfare state, but I would say that for decades now, every single European Union country has kind of the same welfare system. And I've lived myself in Sweden and in Hungary, and I would say that in Hungary you get more family support in some ways than you would do in Sweden, but it's very similar. But with that said, I think it's also important to remember, human nature, that humans, if there is a trend in society, humans tend to pick it up and want to join in. So, I mean, if women in Europe now want to have 2.3 children on average, if we help them fulfill those goals, I'm sure the target will increase. Then suddenly people will want to have even bigger families because family became the new norm. But this is obviously a very, very long work, a very long way to get there, and we barely started, those few countries which are actually trying. So I think the most important thing is that we have a very, very long-term plan for society and how to support families and raise birth rates, and we have to have a very strong story or a strong narrative too, to explain for people that this is our common societal project now, and this is what we all want, and this is the new norm, and we have to work on all fronts, economically of course, but also when it comes to values, narratives, also when it comes to city planning. For example, when you get a building permit, and that applies to both Stockholm and Budapest, most flats that are being built are around 50 square meters. There should be, in the permit, there should be stated a requirement to build more, maybe 100 square meter apartments with 2 or 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms to increase the supply, and then get also down to make them more affordable and available. When it comes to playgrounds have been mentioned before. I think that's very important. I never thought about playgrounds until I became a dad myself. But it's so enjoyable in a city like Budapest, where you have so great playgrounds in so many places. And many times it's also, they're well integrated in nice parks. There's a small coffee shop next to it. You can have a little cappuccino and talk to the other parents. And, in many other cities, when you go to a playground, it's a very small little patch with a broken swing and a minimal slide, and then around it's just litter and asphalt. And, so you have to, adjust your mindset when it comes to everything about society, how you plan society. And important, also always communicate why we are doing this and where we are heading, and get people with you.
So I'd really like to ask the two Hungarians on the panel something. I was talking to a political strategist the other day, and I found out, living here you learn things, that since the family policy has begun, it's almost kind of shored up a base of support of mothers. It's become a kind of I don't think it was intentional per se, but it's very obvious when you think about it. If you're a Labour Party and you're supported by trade, you support the trade unions, you'll form a base of trade unions. How do you? I honestly don't know the answer to this question. How do you view the trade-off there, that the policies become now very focused on mothers, in a sense, and they've almost become a constituent group in Hungarian politics? On the other hand, we kind of want to convince people, actually this could be an alternative to feminism or something like that. I'd just love your broad thoughts on it from a Hungarian perspective.
Partially, it concentrates on mothers, but on the other side, it concentrates on families. You talked about the tax exemption of mothers with children of 2, 3, and more, but at the same time, when you talk about the tax deduction that families can use, it can be used, or they can be used by fathers as well. So it goes to the family itself. And just continuing to what you said, if I can just continue this thought of the choice, and it also connects to your question about mothers and about why mothers. In Hungary, we can stay at home with our children for 3 years. When I say that in Western Europe, they look at me as if I had 2 heads. 3 years, what for? And it doesn't mean that we have to stay at home for 3 years. It means that we can choose whether we want to stay at home with our children for 3 years. I stayed at home with mine for 4 years. And now that my son is grown up, I say I wish I had more time to stay at home with him. And at a conference, it was in Germany actually, I talked about that we have, as mothers, the choice whether we want to stay at home with our children for 3 years or 2 or whatever, or whether we want to go back to work. And András will be able to tell you more about how the income of mothers won't change whether they stay at home with their babies or they go back to work. And I was told not to use the word of freedom of choice, because this is something that is used by the far right, and this is something very repugnant. And I felt very strange, and I said, but aren't we talking about the freedom, and aren't we talking about choice for mothers? But they said, no, I shouldn't say things like that. So this is a little bit, confusing for us Hungarians. And just a tiny little bit, remark that after my presentation, there was another one by a Dutch lady, and the presentation was about the importance of the first 1,000 days and about how societies actually discover the importance of 1,000 days. And I think we just talk about the importance of the first 1,000 days.
Well, Andras, maybe you can follow on from that. So there is actually a kind of a communication here that that mothers can stabilize their income throughout the whole period. I mean, maybe you can tell us something about that. That sounds very interesting.
As Anna mentioned, I took the statistical books. So I didn't take the statistical books. But yes, of course, the tax income, tax reduction, tax relief has a measurable effect on the childbirth. For example, in Hungary, in 2011, the tax reduction was firstly introduced, and we saw an increasing fertility rate. This happened in 2019 at the Family Protection Action Plan. There were 7 points focusing on different kind of family formations, and we also see an increasing fertility rates after that year. And it's important and it's interesting that 2020, everybody knows, COVID pandemic has started. Hungarian the fertility rates during all countries in Europe started to decline, but in Hungary it started to increase, and it started until 2021. And after that, we can see a fertility decrease, but the increase showed, this fertility increase is correlated with this specific measurement. So tax income and focusing on different family formations has a demographic effect.
Can I just add one quick thing there? That you could also actually argue that even in the declining time, the Hungarian programs, the decline has shown them successful in a way, because in real terms, the family support has been going down in Hungary from 21 until now, because of the war and the energy situation, inflation, everything. There hasn't been space in the budget financially to increase so the nominal supports, when they remain the same and the inflation is maybe 30-40% over the last 4 years, then in real terms the family support has been going down in Hungary until now. So basically the birth rate went up when the support was increasing in real terms, and went down a little bit when the support went down in real terms.
Yes, that's right. And as far as we see from the data, 2022, the inflation and the war, which is on the neighborhood of Hungary, that has a very hard effect.
Yeah, this is another point that drives me crazy when people on Twitter are like, "Oh, it fell there," and it's like it's a complex issue. Maybe you should look into it a bit more. Sorry, I've had to deal with these people on Twitter. I'll ask one last question because we're running over time, and I was actually told to end by now, but I think it's an important one, and I think it was raised there very briefly, and it's about housing. If you talk to people, young people, what they're really obsessed with, they say housing. It's understandable why. Housing's extremely expensive, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, the energy is being channeled into a home building movement called the Yummy movement, which is currently, the extremes of it are saying that you should build a shed in your parents' back garden and live in it and play video games. So that's kind of unfortunate. But here they have the CHOC program, if I've pronounced it properly, the CSOK program, which provides substantial grants, so you get a monetary grant, and subsidized loans, mortgages, to couples looking for a home and people with children. I suppose we can take this from different angles, but I mean, maybe you could say something about the housing situation in Britain and how, and the potential for this may be there. I mean, it's a complete obsession in Britain.
It is. I think partly because we have this obsession in Britain that Britain is a nation of homeowners, and I don't know whether we do have higher rates of home ownership than other parts of Europe. But there's a real prejudice against renting, and the kind of ideal is to own your home. And we have had unbelievable house price inflation in the UK, particularly in cities. I mean, everywhere has in the West, but it's been particularly pernicious in Britain. And because London is such a massive financial sector, and because so many London properties are now owned by Russian billionaires, Qatari billionaires from everywhere except Britain, the house prices in London are inflated absolutely astronomically. I lived in a tiny two-bedroom flat in Westminster when I was an MP, and apparently it was worth nearly £1 million, and the rent was £3,500 a month. No young people live in central London. I mean, it's just insanely expensive. So, I'm not a total believer that it's all about housing, but I do think the price and availability of family housing is a big deal in the UK. And one problem is that although we are building houses, we're not building enough, but they are all horrible. They are either flats or tiny two-bed houses with no garden at all, or no buses or anything like that. So we're building the wrong kind of houses. And also, I think we failed to understand that it's actually not just a crisis of supply and demand. It is a broken market because of foreign investment. And that actually, if we want to reduce the price for young people, we're going to have to do either the Hungarian model of subsidisation or build social houses, so the government build houses or local authorities build houses, and then sell them to or rent them to young couples at discounted rates and create a new market, essentially. I just don't think there's any quick way of solving the problem that we have. But I do think housing is an issue. And again, we've also got this problem of the boomer generation now live in all the big houses because they bought them for £15,000 in 1970, and now they're worth £1.5 million. And they don't have anywhere to move to either because we don't have any retirement homes. So I do think it is a big part of the puzzle. But I do think it's only one part of the puzzle, and we shouldn't just obsess with housing. I think it's much more cultural than that.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly to your second suggestion, which I'm really interested in. Social housing initially was used to eliminate extreme poverty, people without toilets, people without water access, and so on. We're past that. No one lives in that type of poverty in our societies anymore. Now people can't have kids and have houses. So maybe we should dust off the social housing model again. It did work last time, even if you're a super free market, it did. In Sweden, what are the issues around housing? Are they as bad? Do you also have this problem with these new builds that are a little pokey and not really suited for family life?
I wouldn't say it's. I mean, the quality of new builds is usually quite decent in Sweden, but the affordability issue is kind of similar. And there's actually an interesting new suggestion from the current government, which is by Swedish standards a right-wing government, or maybe even extreme right, but by Hungarian standards maybe left liberal or something. Anyway, so what they are now, it hasn't been implemented in law yet, but there will be something called the Sweden House, which is like a traditional Swedish family house, quite nice, quite spacey, and you will be able to build it without building permission, if you buy that exactly specific model. But since it's also mass-produced, it's going to be cheap to buy it, and it's going to be easy to build. So we'll see if that helps, but that's one way of addressing that issue.
The IKEA model. We might
exactly. You have to assemble it yourself. Comes in boxes.
You do it over a weekend, I'm sure, and you get very angry and upset. Anna, maybe you could tell us something about the Hungarian situation. Has the CHOC program really impacted young families? Do people talk about it? I mean, to me, it seems the likely explanation of most of the rise in the marriage rate. Am I correct?
I think that there is a very strong cultural background of why housing is so important in Hungary. For some reason, and I don't know why, but for us Hungarians, it is a must to have a home, to own a home. Like renting homes is for some reason just like it's not really for us. Of course, many people do it, but for some reason we all want to own a home. And this program, you mentioned CSOK, this is called CHOC, and with a little bit of twitch, it means kiss in Hungarian, so we like it very much. I think it made a really big difference, because it's not only that, you have support when you want to buy a home, but you can only have a support when you want to renovate your home. You can have support when you start a family. You can have a big amount of money. I mean, you really talk about millions of forints when you want to start a family, have babies. And when you add all these elements, you actually will be able to start a new home. And András will have probably more exact numbers and statistics, but as far as I know, every fourth family in Hungary could actually start a new, with building, buying, renovating. So, I mean, to have a tangible effect. And I think when you have a tangible effect like that, it will have an influence on the number of births. And why it is so important for us. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, Hungary's birth rate was 1.2, which is very, very low. And I don't think that this government had any choice but starting something very radical, because 1.2 is very similar to what, you mentioned Korea in the morning, like the first country that may possible collapse. And I think we didn't want to get to the point where we were close to collapsing. So we started from very low, and now I think you can see these changes now.
Yeah, I'd just say definitely from living here, the density issue isn't a problem. For those who don't know, very high density population is very bad for birth rate. Again, this worries me about some of the YIMBY people building these box apartments. In Hungary, the housing's pretty actually decent, and people even complain about the communist era apartments, but they're actually bigger than the new builds in London and so on. It's quite unusual. People find that very strange here when I try and explain that to them, but it's the truth. I've lived in the London ones. András, do you have any thoughts on housing and birth rates and demographics, especially from a Hungarian perspective, from what you've studied?
This CSOK, CSOK, was introduced in 2015, and it's interesting that in 2009, at the middle of the crisis, the Hungarian family subsidy was stopped, and for 6 years there were no family, no housing subsidy, but a little part was accessible. But 2015, the CSOK was introduced. And after that, we can see, of course, a little bit of increase in the fertility rate. And we see from the past 8-9 years in the statistics that there are two kinds of families. Families who has children, and they start a CSOK house. So they build a house or they buy a house. And there are young couples who are just married and they want to have 1, 2, or 3 children. And the numbers shows that those families who are starting a CSOK are expecting 1 or 1.2 more babies. So it has an effect, fertility effect.
And anecdotally, I believe there is a phenomenon called a CSOK baby in Hungary. I've heard on-the-ground research. Well, we've already run over time, and I'm going to be killed by Helen, so sorry. It's been great. That was fantastic. So maybe we could thank our panelists.